today, second day of the Gaza Tribunal, and we're continuing with our planned sessions for today. At this moment, I would kindly like to request our jury members to come to the stage and sit to their places so we could continue with our planning and planned listenings of the witnesses, experts, and professors, also scholars. We'll be starting very soon. So yes, good afternoon once again, and we will continue as it is planned. And in the next few minutes, we will be looking at the witness eye testimonies about targeting of medical infrastructure, aid, and staff.
براء أنا أريد أن أتحدث الآن. براء رحمة الله عليه كان برفقة حسين محيسن، كان مدير لإسعاف الطوارئ في غزة، وأخونا وائل العطار رحمة الله عليه. ذهبوا، طبعا تلقينا إشارة بوجود عدد من المصابين والشهداء تم استهدافهم في هذه المنطقة، فذهبوا يلبون نداء الإنسانية حتى يتم إنقاذ وإسعاف الجرحى. عندما وصلوا إلى هذا المكان كان الاستهداف للطابق الثاني في عمارة، فصعدوا إلى الطابق الثالث فوجدوا عائلة بأكملها بين شهيد وجريح، ومن بين هؤلاء الجرحى كانوا نساء. فعندما باشروا بنقل المصابين على النقالة قام الاحتلال الإسرائيلي بإطلاق قذيفة على الغرفة التي يتواجد بها هؤلاء الإنسانيين الأبطال المسعفين براء وحسين ووائل، وكان في مسعف رابع معهم في داخل الغرفة، ولكن كان يعني خارج الغرفة، وكتب الله له النجاة. كنت لم أتوقع يوم من الأيام أذهب وأجد ابني يعني براء بهذا المشهد مقطع من قبل هذا الاحتلال الوحشي الذي أجرم بحق أبناء شعبنا الفلسطيني. لم أتوقع يوما من الأيام، يعني صحيح أن أنا بسعف وبنقل وبشاهد هذه المجازر وبشاهد بشاعة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، ولكن يعني الابن يختلف تماما صراحة. ولو أن هذه المشاهد التي تقطع القلب وتدمي القلوب، ولكن يعني كانت بمثابة صدمة يعني إلي باستشهاد ابني براء واستشهاد يعني زملائي الأبطال الذين قضينا معهم طيلة فترة هذا العدوان وما قبل العدوان.
ما يلفت في الأرقام والإحصاءات التي تظهر الآن بشكل أوضح أن هناك 1155 شخص عامل في من الطواقم الطبية، عمل في القطاع الصحي تم استهدافهم. هل تعتقدي أن السلطات الإسرائيلية تتعمد استهداف الطواقم الطبية؟
أكيد، والدليل الدكتور إياد الرنتيسي استشهد بالاعتقال، الدكتور عدنان البرش استشهد بالاعتقال، ولا زال الدكتور حسام أبو صفية والدكتور أحمد المهنا مدير مستشفى العودة ودكاترة كتير يقبعوا لا زالوا في سجون الاحتلال تحت التعذيب. من ضمن الدكاترة اللي استهدفوا من زملاتي يعني المقربين جدا الدكتور باسل المهدي بقصف مستشفى مادي استشهد هو وأخوه عيلته، عيلة أخوه يعني الدكتورة ناهد الحرزين وكل عيلتها استشهدت، الدكتورة سيرين العطار صاحبتي والإنتيم تاعي استشهدت هي وبناتها التنتين، يعني بنتها هي وبنتها وظلوا بناتها التنتين.
دائما كانت السلطات الإسرائيلية تظهر عبر الإعلام خاصة في اقتحام مستشفى الشفاء، الآن أدخلنا ماء، الآن أدخلنا مساعدات، الآن أدخلنا أخلينا الأطفال الخدج. إلى أي مدى هذا الكلام صحيح؟ حضرتك كنت موجودة.
الكلام مش صحيح، كلها دعايات إعلامية من شهادات زملاتنا اللي كانوا تحت الحصار. كانوا يعذبوهم، كانوا يخلوهم ينقلوا المرضى من قسم لقسم، ما كانوش يعطوهم مية أو أي حاجات إلا لما بدها مثلا تدخل صحافة أجنبية أو بدها تدخل حاجات لاجل الاعلام فقط،
بغرض التصوير.
كانوا يعني تخيلي زمايلنا الاطباء كانوا حاطين تقريبا زي حلابه زي ليزر على في نص مجمع الشفاء، لما بدك يجبروهم ينقلوا المرضى من الاستقبال للقسم. ايامها الامير نايف اللي هو عند قسم الاشعاع اللي ما اشتغلش، لما حبسوهم هناك. تخيلي كل مريض لما الاطباء والتمريض يحملوا كل اثنين يحملوا المريض هذا ويدخلوا فيه من هاي الحلابه الليزر، ويروحوا لما بده يرجع وياخذ كمان مريض بده يرد يدخل من نفس الحلابه ونفس الكاميرا ونفس التحقيق ونفس الهاي. واللي بدهم يعتقلوه، اللي بدهم يقصفوه، اللي بدهم يطخوه. فكتير كان تصفيه وتعذيب للكوادر بصوره شنيعه. كانوا يتحججوا ودائما بكذبوا كذبتهم انه في انفاق تحت المستشفى وفي مسلحين. نهائيا ما كانش حدا يقرب عند المستشفى. بالنسبه لقسط الانفاق كلام كاذب، لانه انا اشتغلت 24 سنه بمستشفى الشفاء، ومستشفى الشفاء ذاتا انشئت من سنه بالثمانينات. يعني الثمانينات كانت غزه تحت الاحتلال الاسرائيلي، واللي عملوا البروجي تبعت المستشفى مهندسين يهود. المخطط التفصيلي عندهم بالسنتي المخطط تبعها. ومستشفى زي مجمع الشفاء الطبي اللي هو المجمع الأكبر بكل قطاع غزة، وبتتحول له كل الحالات من الشمال للجنوب، ما بيفضاش ولا بيخلى ثانية واحدة. كيف بدها المقاومة تعمل أنفاق تحته من غير ما الناس تعرف يعني؟
نعم
مستحيل يعني.
Sorry. Before we start, I would like to kindly request from our speakers to try to stick with the time frame, considering we do have a lot to say until the end of the day, and we really do want to give everyone an opportunity to say what they have. So we start with our first speaker saying, "We're not numbers," and he's giving a voice to the youth of Palestine, Ahmed Al-Nouk.
2 years ago, in October 2023, my family went to my home to seek shelter. On the 22nd of October, Israel dropped a bomb on my home, killing the vast majority of my family members. 21 members of my family were there, sleeping in their home, sleeping in their beds, when Israel dropped 1,000-pound bomb on them, killing all of them. They killed my father, who's 75 years old, my 2 brothers, my 3 sisters, and my 14 nieces and nephews, who are all under the age of 13. 21 members of my family were turned into pieces. Their crime, that they were all Palestinians. My family's home was in Deir al-Balah, in what Israel called a humanitarian zone, a safe zone. They did not pose any danger to Israel. They did not fire any missiles. They did not attack any Israelis, and yet they were killed. And for the world, it was just 21 members of the same family who were killed, a number. But for me, that was my family. That was my life. That was my home that was bombed. 21 members of my family were not just a number. They were people. They were human beings. They were fathers. They were mothers. They were daughters. They were sisters and brothers. My father, who was 75 years old, he was the most loving person, the most compassionate person. He did not hurt Israel. He did not belong to any political party, and yet Israel killed him. My older sister, she was a computer engineer, and she was also a teacher at an elementary school. My neighbors told me that they did not find her in one piece, that they found her upper piece of her body in our neighbor's home. My 14 nieces and nephews, they were turned into body pieces. My brother-in-law told me that he did not even recognize his children because their faces were smashed. 14 kids under the age of 13 were killed in my home. My sister Wala was killed with all of her children, 4 children. My sister Ala was killed with all of her children, 5 children. My sister Aya was killed with all of her children, 3 children. My brother Muhammad was killed with his 2 children. My brother Mahmoud was also killed, but he was not married, and he was getting ready to travel to receive his education in Australia. And after that day, I stopped counting how many other family members I lost, how many relatives, how many neighbors, because I thought we are not numbers. We are more than statistics. But I live in London, and I am a journalist. And after Israel killed my family, I was asked to be interviewed for the mainstream media, but not to hear my story, but to interrogate me, to investigate me, to ask me hard questions, to delegitimize me. And that's why, my friends, yes, I blame Israel for killing my family. I blame Israel for not only killing my family since the 7th of October, but also killing my family before the 7th of October. They killed my mother in 2020 because she was a cancer patient and they did not allow her to receive a treatment. They also killed my other brother in 2014 in that war. And 77 years ago, they also killed my grandparents in the Nakba. This genocide did not start on October the 7th, and it did not end 2 years after October the 7th. This genocide has always been ongoing for the past 77 years. And what enabled this genocide, what enabled this apartheid and occupation of the Palestinian land is not only the Israeli system, is not only the Israeli government, but also the governments worldwide who aided and abetted the genocide, who supported Israel blindly. It is also the media, the Western media, who gave Israel the cover and the atmosphere to bomb and to kill as many Palestinians as they desire. This was the first time in history that we watch a live stream genocide. We have been watching a genocide happening in front of our eyes. And still the mainstream media did not choose to cover what was happening in Palestine, what was happening in Gaza, but to cover the truth, to repeat the Israeli lies. They were only parroting the Israeli lies over and over and over because they were interested in the continuation of the genocide in Palestine. So yes, we are here in the Gaza Tribunal today, but it is not only Israel that we seek justice. It's not only Israel. It is Israel. It is the Western governments. It is Britain and the US and the EU. It is the mainstream media. It is the educational systems and institutions who did not cut their relations with Israel. It is everyone who aided and abetted the genocide. And finally, I would like to say to you, yes, I lost most of my family members, and I am crushed. I feel devastated for the loss of my family. But I will never forgive Israel for killing my family. I will never forget my family. And I will always come after those perpetrators. I will always come after those who wronged the Palestinian people. We will come after them. Israel cannot get away with the murder. Israel will not get away with the targeting of the Palestinians. Genocide enablers will not get away with it. We have rights and we seek justice. And from this day until the end of my life, I will speak at every opportunity, at every venue, against the Israeli apartheid and against the Israeli system of control and against the genocide and those who enabled the genocide. We Palestinians will not shut up. We will not be silenced. We will not allow the mainstream media to smear us and intimidate us into silence. We will speak up, but also we need the support from the free world. We cannot do this fight on our own. We need the world to stand with us. We need the world to stand with the Palestinian people, because if Israel is allowed this time to commit a genocide and get away with it, more governments, more authoritarian regimes will commit other genocide in the future. Enough is enough. Israel must find accountability. Israel must not get away with the murder. Genocide must stop, because genocide did not stop. Genocide must stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. And the next to speak is Sahar Francis about sexual assault and mass imprisonment.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, respected and distinguished journey, to invite me to witness and to talk about my experience as a Palestinian lawyer who were working with the Palestinian prisoners' issues for the last 30 years, more or less, and what a difficult mission to speak after Ahmed and to speak after the first session in the morning and all the difficult stories we heard, and to talk about sexual harassment that the Palestinian prisoners endured in the last 2 years. First, allow me to remind ourselves that it really started in 1948 when Israel was using the issue of imprisonment and mass incarceration as the main tool and the main weapon in the hands of the new state to oppress, to control, and to erase the Palestinian society and people who remained inside the state after the creation of the state, and they imposed military regime on them up till 1966. And they continued with developing this military regime, military laws, and ways of oppression after the occupation in 1967. So torture, arbitrary detention, mass detention campaigns, unfair trial procedures, lack of health treatment, solitary confinement, degrading treatment, killings inside the prisons, holding the bodies of the prisoners. None of these practices actually started after October 23. Nothing of these practices were new or that we didn't document it for decades. All these grave violations the Palestinian prisoners were facing in a very, very systematic way, of course, in different phases and in different contexts since 48 till the genocide started. But what happened after the genocide on October 23, was a very serious, significant increase in the mass arrest campaigns in relation to the short period. Because in the first Intifada and in the second Intifada, of course, thousands of people were arrested, but not in such a short period of 2 years to arrest more than 30,000 people from all Palestine, like from the West Bank, from Gaza, from 48 areas. It was a serious deterioration on the level of the lives of these prisoners and the conditions that these prisoners faced inside the detention facilities and in the prisons immediately from day one, couple of hours after Hamas attack on the 7th of October. The prison security units with the prison guards raided the cells and the rooms of the prisoners, and they started to subject them for very severe torture, physical attacks, and lots of abuses. The total number of the prisoners before the 7th of October was 5,200 people. Currently, there's 9,100. This is after releasing almost 2,000 in the exchange deal last week. This includes 400 children that they are still in prison. This includes 53 women that they are still in prison. This includes more than 5,000 detainees held arbitrarily without any legal procedures according to the practice of administrative detention and unlawful competent. I can talk actually for hours about the conditions and the severe violations that these prisoners faced after the 7th of October. But I think I preferred, and it's really, believe me, very, very difficult to describe and talk about the level of torture and what they suffered in these months. Maybe it's enough to mention that already 80 people died. Just last week, we lost 2 detainees for healthcare, lack of healthcare inside the prison. 80 people died in custody since the beginning of the genocide, where their bodies are still kept with the Israeli prison system. Allow me to read just few of the stories, the testimonies of the prisoners. And me and my colleagues in the Damir Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association, we visited in the last 2 years more than 900 people. So you can imagine the amount of testimonies and evidences and information we collected in the last 2 years. The first testimony is for a prisoner, R.A., I would name him. He was arrested from the Gaza Strip with his son. He was subjected to severe torture at the same place in the spot, beating him on his head and then taken him to the area in the Gaza envelope. On the way, the beating and torture continued. Upon reaching the area in the envelope, his clothes were changed and he was placed in the barracks. The barracks is the local name for the detention facility, for 5 days without being interrogated, without being questioned. After this period, they took him to the interrogation. He was beaten, tortured, and starved. He was made to sit on gravel and was prevented from moving. He was stuck on his face, and one of his ribs were broken. Every movement he made was accompanied by beating. After 3 months, he was taken back for further interrogation. He remained in the same barracks for 80 days, during which he was subjected for beatings and torture, including being sodomized with a stick twice, once at the beginning of his detention and once after 3 months. The second testimony actually is for a Palestinian journalist. And he was arrested from the West Bank, and he was tortured and attacked and sexually assaulted in Megiddo prison. And I would call him A.H. It's not the real name, of course. And when he describes that one day in Megiddo prison, he needed medical treatment, and the guards brought him to the way to the clinic, and in the way they were beating him and attacking him. And of course, the doctor checked him and he confirmed that there's nothing serious, there's no further treatment needed, and asked the guards to take him back to the section. So in the way back, he's describing, I was blindfolded, and when they dragged him back, one of the soldiers pointed to him and said, "Are you a journalist working for Al Jazeera? We will bring all the Al Jazeera people here. We will fuck them," sorry, excuse me for this, "and we will fuck their wives and sisters." They began to beat me with extreme violence. I was in severe pain, struggling to endure it. The beating lasted around 20 minutes, a mix of blows, insult, while I lay on the ground. He continues to describe all this painful experience. This continued for around 5 to 7 minutes until I felt them open a gate and push me inside somewhere. My vision was completely gone because of the blindfold. I realized they had taken me into a narrow place, which a very awful smell. Immediately they began removing the lower part of my clothes. While beating me severely, they ordered me, on your knees, head down. I sat on my knees and lowered my head into the floor. They had with them the magnetometer to do the security, the device that they do the security check. They started to hit him with the magnetometer. Then, to my shock, they tried to insert something into my rectum from behind. Instinctively, I tried to resist, but the pain was overwhelming, and eventually I could no longer fight back. Wherever object they were using, it felt like a stick. I felt they also tried to insert the magnetometer, and he's continuing. The stick was not only inserted, but moved inside repeatedly. And I felt this happened at least 5 or 6 times. And he continues to describe how he was taken back to the cell. When I entered to the shower and removed my lower clothes, I noticed blood stains on them. I placed my hand on my rectum, and when I pulled it away, there was blood on my hand. And these 2 cases were not reported in the media, were not no one complained about this, no one was found accountable about this sexual assault. I will end. I'm sure most of you saw the leaked video about the Sdeti Man detention facility where in July 24, one of the Gazan detainees was raped brutally, and he was hospitalized in a very critical conditions. And later on, they arrested 5 soldiers for this assault. This detainee was released in the last exchange deal, and we believe that this release came in order to close the legal case against the soldiers, so they will never be accountable for what they did. And this man, I visited him several times. I just talked to him before I came here, and he's broken. They attacked him. They started to attack him at 6 p.m. in the evening. They just took him from his cell and they pushed him for an area that is not the cameras in the Sdeti Man section cannot reach it, where there's no video of the cameras, of the security cameras of the detention facility. But they were 7 to 10 soldiers, and they started to beat him and attack him very severely. He says that it lasted more or less half an hour. Then he was starting to feel exhausted, lying on the ground, unable to breathe, and kept telling them to let me breathe because I felt pain all over my body. I was lying on my stomach with everyone around me, and they continued to shock me. I felt a soldier insert a baton from behind when my pants came down. They were all standing around and hitting me. They removed the blindfold in the middle of the beatings. And when I turned around, I saw the soldier that was pushing the baton in his anus. The soldier lifted the baton and tried to put it in my mouth while speaking in Arabic. I refused to open my mouth. So he placed it on the ground and forced me to grab it and put it in my mouth. Later, they took him back to his mattress and they told him not to dare to even tell a doctor because otherwise they will come back for him. I will end that without accountability, there's no justice. And this is why it's really very essential that the perpetrators should pay a price for all these grave violations that were committed systematically since 48 till today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Francis. Repricide, how Israel's genocide in Gaza targets the present and the future of Palestinian life. Please welcome Hala Shuman.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Again, it's very difficult to speak after Ahmad and after Siham's testimonies recorded from people who have faced sexual and other types of physical torture. But here we are. My name is Hala Shuman. I'm a Palestinian researcher, dentist, a PhD scholar from Gaza. I'm here today in my capacity as an expert in gendered and reproductive violence, specifically within the genocide. In the 10 minutes I have, I'll address why what's unfolding in Gaza right now is not only a genocide, but it also extends to what's termed a reprocide or reproductive genocide. And it's about the systematic targeting of reproductive health and capacities in a community and in Gaza in order to eliminate their present, but also their future. To eliminate the mothers, the infants, fathers, sons' capacity to conceive, carry, birth, feed, heal, and also raise the next generation. The jury should be aware what reprocide means. In December 2023, an Israeli missile hit Gaza's largest fertility clinic center, Al Basma IVF Center in Gaza. The single strike have destroyed more than 4,000 embryos and over than 1,000 unfertilized eggs and sperms. Dr. Baha al-Ghalayini, the obstetrician who established the clinic, have summed up the impact of this attack by saying, quotations, 5,000 lives in one chill. The strike was an act of reprocide, killing potential lives, killing the possibility of a future of those families becoming families and having children, and also damaging the infrastructure that might enable those families and other families in the future to have children. In the context of Israeli ongoing genocide in Gaza, reprocide serves as a tactic. In the Genocide Convention, there is some mention of the prevention of birth, like imposing measures intended to prevent birth within particular national, ethnic, or religious group and modality, and this is part of the genocide. However, reprocide extends that to a temporal dimension affecting the present and the future, but also it's extending it to affecting not only prevention of birth, but affecting the family continuity, annihilation of whole families, thousands of extended families in Gaza, preventing of lineages, and affecting the psyche and ability of reproduction. Reprocide or reproductive genocide includes direct attacks on family, on health, killing families, killing parents, killing the partners and widowing the other one so they can't reproduce, bombing maternity clinics and hospitals, killing gynecologists and specialists, or indirect measures as in the ability to have safe reproduction, the siege that serves, that prevents pregnant women from and infants from safety, power cuts that stop incubators working, blockade that withdraw anesthetics, antibiotics, and other medications needed for such safety pregnancy and safety delivery. And also sexualized violence in sexual violence capacity, but also in prevention of intimacy with the overcrowding and the forced displacement of women and men in Gaza. I'll be talking about the anatomy of reproductive within three main strategies or three main forms, and I will benefit mainly from testimonies from people who are inside Gaza or they have served inside Gaza. The first type or strategy that Israel uses is obstetric violence or obstetric collapse. And I'll be reading a testimony by a husband. His name is Karim Abu Sharia from Gaza. And he says, quotation, "On 19th November 2023, my wife Amina Abu Sharia was 9 months pregnant. At about 2 a.m., we were in Saftawi area of North Gaza when her labor started suddenly. A military operation was due to begin that night on Jabalia. No one could leave their homes. We tried calling ambulances, no answer. The situation became critical, so I decided to risk transporting her by car. I told my wife, either we reach Sahaba Hospital or Baptist Hospital, or the aircraft target us on the road and we die trying. Trying is better than watching you die without trying. I carried my wife and went down from our 6th floor apartment. On the staircase, and seemingly from fear, my wife couldn't hold and give birth on the stairs. Unfortunately, only my sister and her mother were present. We had no supplies, we were unprepared. My wife fainted and she bled a lot. We even used the lights cautiously because aircrafts were flying very low and monitoring everything. At the same hour, shells began falling on the street, around building and on the top floor. We moved down to a lower floor on the 3rd floor, and 2 days later, this same 5th floor was bombed by Israel while we were in the same building. But we survived because we were 2 floors under. The violent genocide that made pregnancies risky, delivery very dangerous, being able to reach to hospitals, to maternity clinics and find physicians who are able of delivering safely is all part of this obstetric violence. The other strategy that Israel uses for reproductive is domicide and forced displacement. Since October 2023, Israeli attacks have damaged or destroyed nearly 70% of Gaza structure, including 92% of its housing units. With more than 135,000 homes destroyed, families are crammed into tents without privacy or sanitation. Women give birth on roads or in tents, on rubble, overcrowded classrooms. The forced displacement does not only mean suffering, loss of belonging or personal place, but also it's designed to be violent against even the family as a unit. Another testimony on that from Nancy Abu Musa from Gaza. Quotation, "I was 6 months pregnant with twins. I walked almost 10 kilometers, 18 hours from Nasser Street, Gaza City toward the south. I pushed my husband in a wheelchair. It was overcrowded and full of danger, fire belts from Israeli bombing and drones. We couldn't rest. When we reached the south, my water broke. I didn't want to deliver. I was terrified for them. In the crush of people, labor surprised me. My eyes caught a tiny body dropping to the ground. I spread the only blanket we had, and on the bare asphalt at Nueri Hill, I gave birth to 2 babies whom this world offered nothing but quick death. They didn't cry, they didn't face hunger. They knew only one displacement and one final absence." End of quote. Domicide, the destruction of homes, creation of reproduction violence is not abstract. It's about the loss of homes, loss of walls, loss of ability to go to the hospital again, losing this infrastructure that's very important for intimacy, but also for reproduction and safely reproduction. The third and last strategy I'll talk about today is targeting men and boys and sexual violence, which many of the testimonies that were shared before I will not repeat. Rebrocide also attacks male fertility and social reproduction. The British surgeon Nick Minard, interviewed on Sky News on the 25 July 2025, said, quotation, "One day, 12 days ago, 4 young teenage boys came in, all whom had been shot in testicles, deliberately so. The clustering was far too obvious to be coincidental." End of quote. Such clusters, gunshot wounds to the genitals and pelvis are acts of deliberate rebrocide and maiming of women, of children, boys and men. UN investigators and mandate holders record systematic pattern of sexual violence against Palestinian detainees, as mentioned before, not only by raping them and all of that, but also by beating their genitals until they bleed and until they have problems. Commissioner and others also confirmed the participation of both male and female soldiers in sexual assaults, especially on male detainees with female soldiers. Their attacks and the resulting PTSD, post-traumatic disorder from those attacks, are other problems underscores the systematic sexualized nature of Israeli custodial torture and reprocidal acts within this Israeli intentional genocide. That's directly affecting the ability to be intimate and the ability to reproduce. Furthermore, the broader conditions of bombing more than 90% of homes means that people don't have the ability to be intimate. They don't have safe spaces, private spaces for that, which again affects their sexual health, but also their reproductive health. Before that, and before people think that the reprocide and the reproductive violence have just started with this genocide, we need to remember that reproductive violence is part of the Israeli long-term plan of colonialism and settler colonialism, annihilation and replacement of the Palestinians. It's a long-term policy and strategy used by Israel. What happened after 2023, October the 7th, is only exaggeration of the use of this tactic and strategy. The jury should recognize that what's unfolding in Gaza is not only genocide, it extends to become reprocide, the destruction of reproductive life in the present and also in the future. This understanding broadens the field of accountability. It links obstetric collapse, starvation, domicide, and sexual violence to reproductive matrix. It exposes temporality of genocide, not just the kill of what is present, but also the future and ability to live. And it calls for reparative justice that rebuilds the material and social conditions for Palestinian reproduction, from hospitals to maternity health, nutrition, safety, and dignity. A grieving father from Gaza said, "We're not hatcheries that can just produce children." He is right. Reprocide is not about numbers alone. It's not just about how many children, women, and men have been killed. It's about whether a mother can labor without terror and fear, whether a father can hold his child without bleeding from shackles, whether a newborn can be warmed and fed and doesn't face this brutality. I urge the jury to name these crimes from what they are: reprocidal campaign to erase Palestinians' existence in both present and future. Recognition of reprocide is a step toward accountability and toward rebuilding the conditions in which Palestinian life, birth can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Hala. Now I will open space for questions and answers. If members of the jury have questions, we can proceed. If not, we will continue. Yes, please, go on. Now you're on.
Quick question, are all these cases documented someplace? Or are they just anecdotal?
I'm sorry, what?
all these cases that have been cited today, is there a central place where they are documented?
I do call Ms. Francis just to come up and please answer this question, since you have been being very accurate about these sexual assaults and violations of...
All the data from Damir is very well documented. Part of it is already issued in report public on our website, and some were submitted to the ICC and the ICJ and the other special procedures, and lately like for the Committee Against Torture, so we can also share it. Those that they are not published on the website, we can share it directly with the journal.
And just very quickly, are these anecdotal or are these systematic, that they're happening to 10%, 20%, 30% or more of the prisoners?
The problem in the sexual harassment issues, like from my experience, I visited more than 145 detainees alone from Gaza. Very few of them shared with me this harsh experience. And those who decided to speak and to share, they were telling me that it was systematic, especially in Sdeiman detention facility, in Ofer detention, because in Ofer prison, there is a prison under the prison service, but there's a military camp that was developed after the war. So those who were in Ofer under the army, they were also facing lots of sexual violence, as well in the rest of the prisons, like because also police guards were involved in such actions. But most of the people were silent. They were not able to share this harsh experience.
One last question. I know this is very sensitive. All the examples are male prisoners. Are you aware of any rape against female prisoners?
To be very accurate, we in the organization, we didn't document a rape case against a female detainee in the current genocide. We have old cases. In 2015, we followed a case against a Palestinian physician from Hebron that she was raped. The case was brought to the investigating body inside Israel, and it reached a stage where the head of the investigating body recommended that there's a criminal file that should be opened, and they managed to close the file without any accountability. But other colleagues from the Gaza human rights organizations and international bodies documented rape cases against female detainees as well.
Just a question to you about, there have been many reports of the Israelis removing body parts from Palestinian prisoners. Can you say something about that?
Yes. So also in the issue of the organs and taking organs, I don't have a scientific confirmation and evidence on such issues. And there is like discussion whether it happens or not, but to be very clear, we don't have as an organizations any proof, any legal proof that this is happening. There's so many different circumstances why families would suspect that there's stealing organs, especially even before the war. Like this is a long history in the Palestinian prisoners context, because they keep the bodies in frozen situations. So, and when they give it back, they force the families to bury them immediately within 2 hours in very difficult conditions. Most of the cases were buried without implementing proper autopsy on it to prove whether, and the families were suspecting that they're taking cornea, exactly, because of the way how it looked after being for several years in frozen positions.
Thank you. Are all the cases of detention recorded by the Israelis? Or do we have the phenomenon we've seen in other countries of essentially disappearance? People who've apparently been arrested but are never again heard of.
You mean registered the violations?
No, registered that they have been arrested and have been taken into detention, and so there's a record of where the person is.
So not all of them, because in the war, like after the genocide started, there's hundreds of cases of disappeared people where we communicated as lawyers with the army, and we were informed in several cases that the person is not arrested, is not there, and we informed the family that obviously he's not in prison, and in the exchange deal, some of them, they were released back. So they were literally forced disappeared for 2 years or 1 year and a half.
Okay, thank you. And can I follow up on an earlier question?
Just one quick. Is it for Ms. Francis or?
Either.
Okay, it's okay.
We know that sexual violence against women occurs in just about every conflict situation. And my colleague has asked about sexual violence against females in detention. What about sexual violence against females outside the detention situation in the areas of the genocide in the Gaza Strip? Is that occurring? Do we know? Do we have any evidence, information about that?
I assume this is a question for Ms. Francis too. Yep. Right, yes. Ms. Francis, please. Thank you, sorry.
So of course, it's very common, especially on checkpoints, on when they raid the houses, for example, to arrest someone, they would abuse and harass the whole family members, including women. And lots of stories were documented either by us or other colleagues in the Gaza genocide on all these checkpoints that they invented internally in the Gaza Strip. When we're forcing family to move from one area to another, there were lots of sexual harassment. And there were very severe cases where the Committee Against Discrimination on the UN level documented very strong cases about rape and sexual assault in the Gaza Strip against women that they were never detained. Some of them, they were executed as well. So it happened a lot. And for the detainees, of course, they face a lot of sexual harassment.
Very quick clarification. You said that currently there are 400 children and 53 women in detention.
Currently.
Even though the Trump plan called that all women and children would be released.
No, it was just relative to the Gaza detainees. The 2 women who were released in the exchange last week and the 15 boys who were released, they were all from the Gaza Strip. So those who remained in detention now, they are from the West Bank or from inside or Jerusalem or inside Israel.
But the Trump plan did not say Gaza. It said actually 250 who would be sentenced to life, all women and children, and then it says 1,700 from Gaza.
It's not true.
The reason I'm saying this is because this is what Hamas is saying, and Israel is saying the opposite. So what is the actual thing?
The actual figures is this.
The actual understanding.
Children and women. I mean now, currently, up till maybe it's more because in the last 2 days I wasn't following the statistics. 53 women are still in detention in a Damoun prison, and more than 400 children arrested and distributed in different prisons inside Israel.
Thank you. We have one more answer, and then we will proceed.
Just short clarifications on the points mentioned. First of all, there is a report published on March 2025 about More Than a Human Can Bear. and talks about women, men, children testimonies of sexual harassment, reproductive violence, and gender-based violence by Israel and different places. So there are stories, for instance, of a woman who had a C-section in a hospital, and Israeli ground invaded the hospital, they surrounded it, and they got into the hospital, and they threatened her of raping her in front of her husband, the woman who just had a C-section. There are also testimonies of, in that report and other reports, of people, women, and also children, females, who had been forced to strip naked, who were sexually harassed, physically and sexually harassed, and some of them were forced to strip naked other men that they didn't know. There's also a UN testimony by one of the lawyers, and she talked about some women, 2 women from Gaza. One of them was gang raped by 2 soldiers, each at a time, and it's also videotaped. So sexual harassment, sexual violence, and rape are documented. But again, as Sahar have mentioned before, it's very difficult to systematically collect them because there is the shame and the fear and the PTSD and all the issues related to the rape itself, but then rape as a torture by a settler colonial power. Also about the autopsy in Gaza, you know that some bodies, 80 bodies in the last time were sent to Gaza, and all, like the killed bodies, and all of those bodies were searched by forensic doctors with autopsy at the beginning, and then they allowed the families to come and look after them and check if they know them, they recognize them or not. So some of the doctors, the forensic doctors, mentioned that there are some organs that have been removed, taken, stolen from the Palestinian bodies. Another thing that we need to speak about, and I don't think it's spoken about very clearly, which is not just the women, children, and men who were forcibly disappearance, but also those who we have Israeli testimonies or Israeli evidence that they were taken, but we have no idea about them. Among them, the baby, the few months-old baby that was kidnapped by Israeli soldier, taken to Israel, and another Israeli soldier told her story. Another girl was last time, 9-year-old, was last time seen with Israeli soldier in a photo, and then she also disappeared. So those things we need also to keep our mind and our efforts on them. We need to understand where our children and what happened to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our speakers, to our jury for questions and answers. We will continue to talk about journalists in the next edition of this session. So, Abu Bakr Abed will be talking right now. I hope that he's online and that he can hear us loud and clear. And the subject he will be speaking about is testimony of a Palestinian journalist from Gaza. Mr. Abed, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Do you hear me?
Good, we can hear you too, and the time is yours. Please, go on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for what you're doing. I hope all of this will be transformed into real action, and that accountability and justice will be run in the best way possible against Israel, and as Ahmed now said, against every Western government that has facilitated the genocide, and also the Arab countries that have played a major role in it. So regarding journalists in Gaza, first and foremost, we know that over 250 journalists and media workers have been murdered in Gaza, most of whom are very young. When we are talking about journalists, we're talking about an age range under 30 years old, so most of them are very, very young, well, of course, including me, just 22. And the fact that 250 journalists have been hunted down, most of them as well have been hunted down by Israel after smear campaigns that the international community and committees to protect journalists have failed to tackle, or even have failed to protect these journalists from smear media campaigns, despite the many, many calls by my colleagues on the world to stop it. I would start by saying that in Gaza, we're not, I would be very conservative in the word journalism, because I don't think what we're doing is journalism. It's above that, it's more than that. It's genocide documentation, because we are a part of it, and we're not living high on the hog, like we're working in fancy 5-star hotels to report what's going on in Gaza. We haven't come from outside into Gaza to report it. No, we're a part of it. The pain is ours, the agony is a part of our life, and we're multitasking. So we're not just responsible for reporting, we're not just reporting, no, we're multitasking. We are taking care of our families, we are sometimes losing our family members, and as someone speaking right now as a journalist, I've lost over 50 members of my family, including my entire cousin's family, which was wiped out in the last week of March and this year. And a year before this attack, my aunt's family was also wiped out, and I lost my very dear friend in December 2023. So we also lose family members. And the attacks on journalists, probably some of you have noticed that most of the attacks have been targeted or have been directed at journalists with their families. So it wasn't just an attack on the journalists themselves, and most of them have lost their families. If not them, it would be their families. Documenting a genocide is not just like what you would expect. It is about believing that the next time will be your last time, that the next report will be your last time. And given the fact that I was a digital and a TV reporter, digital reporting and writing stories is, of course, a lot harder job than just appearing on TV and saying what you have witnessed or what you have heard from people. Because when you sit with people to write a story, you need to transcribe their pain and their agony and everything they have been through into words. You're not just transcribing what they are telling you. And I remember, like, one of the stories, given the fact that you have just mentioned the Palestinian hostages and the way they're treated in Israeli dungeons. One of the stories that we produced during the first ceasefire, the second ceasefire indeed, in January 2025, the story was launched in February, was for 17-year-old Mohammed Abu Sahlul. He was kidnapped by Israel from his home in Khan Yunis when he was 16 years old, and then he was freed a year later. And Mohammed was, one part of the torture he faced was that Israeli soldiers were putting handcuffs on his genitals, and he was forced to watch Israeli soldiers having sex in front of him, and sometimes they were obliging him to drink alcoholic drinks, which he doesn't drink given the reality that he's a Muslim, but he was forced to drink them. So every time he refused that, he was hit severely. He was clubbed by one of the Israeli soldiers, and he would fall unconscious. A lot of the times the soldiers or the officers, his guards, would come in and just torture him mentally, saying that the same as Mr. Sahar said, we're gonna have your mother, we're gonna have your sisters if you interview. And every time they would tell him that, well, we have killed your family, we have killed everyone, you will never get out of this prison, of this cell. And they would humiliate them with giving them food, like 2 spoons of rice for 5 in one cell. And every time he asked to see the sun outside, the soldiers told him that you don't deserve to see the daylight, so you're going to be here forever in the darkness. So the trauma he faced after leaving, as he told me when I sat with him in Khan Yunis, in the southern part near the sea of Khan Yunis, he told me that every time I wake up right now and until this moment, he always makes sure that there are no handcuffs on his both hands and that he can see the light, and every time he checks that his family is around him. And he lost his home, he lost so many members of his family. So for us to report this is absolutely beyond painful. This is not just about telling what we are telling, and probably many of you know, or some of you know, this is not what I wanted to report, because since before this genocide, I was reporting of football, I was reporting of sports, and I did cover sports during the genocide, the sports tragedy in Gaza, which has been entirely decimated by Israel. Like most of their infrastructure, 99% has been leveled up, and over 800 athletes have been killed, including 400 footballers, more than 450 footballers, sorry. So how many stories should we report? How many lives should be taken among us, just that the people can know? And another important point about it is that Western media outlets that haven't believed us, because we have to remember on this day, Israeli strikes have killed 2 years ago, have killed 700 people in Gaza. And the death toll 2 years ago was 5,000 people, including 2,000 children at that time, 2 years ago. On this particular date, October 24th, 2023. This could have stopped if Western media outlets and Western journalists believed that we were their colleagues. If they believed that they should have amplified the voices, if they believe that their job is not just to get into Gaza and seek fame, money, but to share our grief and share our agony and make sure that they were reporting the truth. But Western media has always been interested in lies, in a cover-up for genocide, and to make sure that everything they say will serve the Israelis. Because had they done this, hadn't they dishonored and discredited Palestinian journalists, and had they believed in them, this genocide wouldn't have spanned for 2 years. So it is important, it is absolutely significant, and one of the most monumentally fundamental steps to any tribunal that would concern Gaza is to hold everyone who has played a role in this genocide accountable. And on top of that, it must be Western media outlets who have completely ignored the Palestinian journalists' grief and the killing spree that is unprecedented. We're talking about more than 250. I'm very lucky to have survived all this. I know what I'm doing is not what I want to do. It's in the end my job. We live in stories. We are the living stories. But I hope that our living stories will be turned into, or will usher, and telling these stories as I'm doing right now, will usher in a new, better future, not only for me, but for everyone in Gaza and across occupied Palestine. And that needs unified efforts, that needs people to stand together, because we cannot just allow the blood of 250 Palestinian journalists, the blood of over 70,000 Palestinians, and the maiming of too many Palestinians just to go away without any results. This has to, everything and every crime, it has to be documented, and Israel must be held accountable, and every party that has helped Israel do this must be held accountable. I am in relentless grief. The genocide has not ended. It's just on a different scale. The grief has started now, the pain has started now, and mourning our deaths has started now, because we've never had the time to mourn our deaths. One of the times when I was reporting, my cousin and his son were killed in the same street where I was living, and after that I had to go live on TV to say, well, my cousin was killed and his son was killed. I'm grieving my loss right now. And then after the report, I had to take his body to the graveyard to pay condolences to my family, and then bury him, pray the funeral prayers, and then back to Al-Aqsa Hospital to say that I have buried him. This is not journalism. This is genocide documentation, of which we are a part. So if you want to keep a record of the testimonies, if we want to keep a record of what we have been living through, the first step is to make sure that everyone, and the journalists who have been burned alive, and most of them are young men. If you look at the wells after their deaths, they just wanted to be fathers, they just wanted to get married, they just wanted to continue their education. They didn't want to be forced, into genocide documentation. No, they just needed or hoped for a good life. And this is our collective responsibility to revive the humanity of Palestinians and to, again, make sure that justice will come to the people who have deliberately dehumanized Palestinians over the course of the past 2 years, particularly and unequivocally, and again, Western journalists who must pay a price for what they have allowed in the last 2 years. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abed. And I'm calling for Munir Nusabay to talk about eradicating journalists, systematic attacks on journalists in Gaza as a genocidal strategy. Mr. Nusabay, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished jury of conscience. A long-standing principle of international humanitarian law holds that journalists and their equipment are to be regarded as civilians and civilian objects, respectively, and therefore enjoy protected status, provided that they do not take direct part in hostilities. Their observant role through the dangers of war is very vital. Journalists serve as witnesses and interpreters, providing the indispensable conduit through which the ravage of war reach the world's consciousness. In Gaza, Israel has for long controlled entry and movement of foreign journalists, requiring that they embed on tightly supervised military tours, if allowed, and has frequently denied visas, revoked permits, or effectively exhausted international press entirely during major offensives, thereby institutionalizing a mechanism of information blackout, a mechanism that is integral to the Israeli genocidal machinery in Gaza. The near total prohibition of independent international media access to the enclave is one of the most distinctive and rare features of the Gaza genocide. While limitations on media are common in armed conflict, the outright barring of foreign press during sustained bombardment is exceptional. By preventing and obstructing external observers, Israel ensures that genocidal acts of mass killings and systematic destruction of infrastructure essential for civilian survival occur largely unseen. These dead zones of reporting allow Israel to commit atrocities with minimal immediate scrutiny. The logic is simple. The fewer outside eyes, the greater the leeway to conduct large-scale atrocities and pursue genocidal objectives. Accordingly, the denial of unrestricted press to Gaza constitutes a foundational factor in Israeli strategy of genocide. Consequently, the only journalists able to report from Gaza are Palestinian journalists operating under constant existential threat and severe operational constraints. Their systematic targeting constitutes a deliberate genocidal tactic, precisely because they are the sole witnesses and chronicles of events on the ground. The elimination and silencing of these journalists is institutional to the execution of the campaign's objectives. Is instrumental, to the execution of the campaign's objectives. In other words, an attempt to conceal the genocide.
Crucially, when journalists are targeted, the international community is deprived of timely, accurate information, undermining its ability to assess, respond to, and prevent ongoing genocide. This obstruction directly implicates states' responsibilities under the Genocide Convention, which obligates state parties to take proactive measures to prevent genocide. The numbers merit stark emphasis. Gaza has become the deadliest place on earth for journalists in modern history by orders of magnitude. The time of the most recent ceasefire, by the time of the most recent ceasefire, more than 248 journalists had been killed in Gaza since October 2023, of whom at least 56 were directly targeted or killed by virtue of their work, reportedly. Many media offices, broadcasting facilities, communication nodes, and journalistic equipment were also destroyed or degraded. According to the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, 535 journalists were injured, 49 detained, and 150 media institutions destroyed. Family members of journalists have been highly affected, as hundreds of them have been murdered or injured. Comparative observation highlights that the exceptional character. Journalist fatalities in Gaza, just in a few months, what took Israel to murder in a few months in Gaza, what happened in decades elsewhere in the world. It's the deadliest and most deliberate effort to kill and silence journalists ever documented. In historical conflict, World War II saw 68 journalists killed. In Vietnam, around 65 over a span of decades. Gaza death toll alone in less than 2 years surpasses all of these totals. Far from being incidental, the killings and targeting show hallmarks of consistent pattern. Strikes on marked vehicles or buildings, penetrating journalist shelters and medical tents, multiple journalists killed in a single strike, and the targeting of media infrastructures. The targeting and killing of veteran journalists and of journalists wearing clearly marked press gear in particular appear to form a part of a recurring pattern that supports the inference of deliberate targeting as a policy. Now, in order to look at this policy from the legal point of view, of course, it is very easy to characterize it as part of a number of war crimes and crimes against humanity because it is indeed widespread and systematic. However, within the context of the Gaza Strip, it's very important to also note that this targeting of journalists is part of the wider genocidal intent that Israel has been committing. And this has a number of factors that should be mentioned here. On the one hand, by doing that, Israel is concealing evidence and external scrutiny, because journalists document, verify, and testify. When they are killed, detained, or forced underground, the capacity of the international community, NGOs, victims, and courts to monitor atrocities is severely weakened. Without independent reporting, much of the violence proceeds unrecorded or unaccounted for. Controlling the narrative and enabling denial. Silencing journalists allows the perpetrator to dominate public discourse, frame attacks as legitimate, deny casualties, and portray destruction as inevitable. This destructive control helps suppress moral outrage, mobilize domestic support, and delay the deflect international legal pressure. In genocide, denial is often recognized as the final stage. By diminishing, making, or reinterpreting atrocity, the perpetrator seeks to erase the memory and avoid accountability. The information blackout in Gaza functions precisely to facilitate such denial. Inducing fear and chilling reporting. Repeated targeted killing of journalists deter others from reporting, creating playable fear. This reduces investigative coverage, diminishes the pool of reporters, and pushes others to self-censorship. In a genocidal design, reducing the space of counter-witnesses is tactical. Finally, contributing to conditions of life harm. Under Article 11C of the Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about destruction in whole or in part is prescribed. Obstruction of humanitarian aid, siege, starvation, forced displacement, these are often considered within that clause. The silencing of journalists is highly likely to augment the harm by impeding information about urgent needs, for example, famine or disease, thereby facilitating neglect or forced suffering and multiplying the destructive conditions. If all of this is not enough, Israeli officials have reportedly stated that information blackouts leave Palestinians in fear and anxiety, as isolation is part of Israel's psychological warfare. Sorry? Okay. Thank you very much. It's fine.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as I have said at the beginning, it is really important for us to stick within time frames in order for everyone to have a chance to talk. So, as of the members of the jury, do we have any questions for the topic about journalists and their lives in Gaza?
Again, very quickly, so that we can distinguish Gaza from other conflicts, I looked this up. It would be nice to have it in a table form and to add it to the body of evidence. In World War II, over 6 years, there were 69 journalists killed. In Vietnam, over 10 years, 63. In Ukraine, which is 18 months more than Gaza, 17. And in Gaza, 274, how much?
48, 248, but there is a more recent number from the Syndicate of Journalists, 252.
So you could see that even if you combine all the journalists killed in all these wars, Gaza is 3 times as much. I think it's very nice, it's very important that we highlight this and to show the discrepancy and also how the world is not showing the same outrage that they have shown with, for instance, Ukraine.
Indeed, I will provide that table for you. Thank you. Thank you.
So the discussion and the analysis, along with the scholars and speakers about the crimes, is ending here for now. You will have 15 minutes of a coffee break, and then we can go to, I hope you will manage to come here at 4, considering that for Gaza Tribunal, Jeremy Corbyn will be speaking, so I kindly ask you to be here at 4. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your respectance of the time frame. And now for Gaza Tribunal, as we have announced before this short break, will speak Mr. Jeremy Corbyn. He's with us. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to see you and to talk to you all.
The time is yours. Go on.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I didn't realize that. First of all, thank you for inviting me. And my regret is that I'm in North London, not in Istanbul at the present time. But I'm sure for a future meeting, we'll be able to meet physically together, hopefully in Istanbul. So I thank you for that. What I want to do is talk you through what we did for the Gaza Tribunal that we held. The background to it was that I proposed a private member's bill in Parliament to require the government to establish an independent commission of inquiry into British policy in relation to Gaza, and in particular in relation to the sale of arms and weapons to Israel, which have contributed to the horrible events and the genocide that took place in Gaza. This bill managed to get past its first stage in Parliament, but didn't get beyond that. It was blocked beyond that. And so I thought, well, either we can just leave it there and do something else, or we could indeed establish our own independent inquiry, which is exactly what we did. So we set up our own independent tribunal of inquiry, which met for 2 days in September, and we took witness statements from 29 people. And I was joined as one of the 3 assessors to it by Professor Niamh Gordon from Queen Mary University and Dr. Shah Hamouri from the University of Kent. So you had one Jewish American and one Palestinian in exile as the assessors with me. And we divided the tribunal into 4 sections. Part 1, we discussed what has actually happened in Gaza. So we heard from survivors, from witnesses, about the scale of the human suffering, the devastation and the destruction that had taken place in Gaza. 2 of our witnesses were very, very powerful witnesses indeed, both very experienced medical practitioners, doctors, Dr. Nick Maynard and Dr. Victoria Rose. They gave us testimonies of their own experience in Gaza, operating on obviously very badly injured people, many of whom were children, in hospitals that were being bombed at that very time, and hoping to carry on with their work and their operations despite the bombardment that was going on. And the lack of medicines, the lack of water, the lack of electric power, and even the lack of anesthetics or antiseptics in order to treat people. Yet they carried on doing their work. Now, I've known many, many doctors over the years, and doctors are quite hard-bitten. They see life and death very close up every day. But I've never seen 2 doctors more emotionally connected to their patients than Nick and Victoria in the way that they do things. And they don't have to do this, but they both try to go back into Gaza, and all the time when they're not in Gaza, when they're mainly in the UK, they spend their energy and time campaigning and talking about the issue of the Palestinian people. So I think it's to those medical practitioners we should all say an enormous thank you. And he went on to say, Nick did, about the way in which Britain is contributing to the suffering in Gaza obviously by the supply of weapons to Israel, although that the government claims is now reducing. But the reality is so many weapons have been supplied to Israel, they can last for a very long time without any fresh supplies. But crucially, their main weapon of war is the F-35 jet. 15% of the components of the F-35 jet are made at factories in Britain, in Newcastle, in Sheffield, and in some other places around the country. We also heard from Declassified UK, from John McAvoy. He's the chief reporter of Declassified. This is an independent media outlet that, as its name suggests, tries to expose truths that are going on that governments don't want exposed. And he was able to reveal that the UK, Britain, is training Israeli soldiers. Not a huge number, but they are training them. And the Ministry of Defence has tried to assure us in Parliament that they're being trained in military and human rights values in what they do. So I asked myself this question. Israel has been condemned in the Fourth Geneva Convention, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, and many, many other independent human rights bodies around the world. And yet Britain is training their soldiers. It is absolutely outrageous, which then brings into question what they're actually doing and what the effects of all the Israeli soldiers' actions have been. So we had evidence put from Dr. Raz Segal, a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies from the United States. And he described in some detail what the law on genocide is, the genesis of that law, how it came about, and what would constitute genocide, which is an act of attacking and trying to destroy a particular group of people. Hence the description of the Palestinian people as a group of people that are being attacked with genocidal intent. You could say the same with what happened in Darfur. You could say the same with what happened in Cambodia. You could say the same with what happened in Rwanda. And historically, you could say the same about the European invasion of Central America. And there are many, many other colonial examples around the world. And he, and I quote, said that Gaza is a textbook case of genocide. And so we were hearing all this evidence, but I was concerned that we were not necessarily hearing sufficient number of Palestinian voices. And so we had a student called Abu Bakr Abed, who is a wonderful young man from Gaza, who has received a scholarship from the Irish government to study sports media in Dublin, in the university in Dublin. And he came to London to give evidence, and his was very, very powerful, describing what happened to him, what happened to his family. And bear in mind that he wouldn't mind me saying this, has a sort of guilt of being outside Gaza because all his family are still there, and he's obviously concerned for them, their safety and their future. So he feels it's his duty and his responsibility to work very hard and study very hard. And so he asked us to support the call for a sporting boycott of Israel. And that's where the current dispute about Maccabi Tel Aviv playing against Aston Villa in Britain has become such a big issue. But he also said, and he's somebody that studies the media a great deal, and he's now doing university studies on it, that the British media had actually been complicit in the genocide in Gaza by their failure to report many of the details, and indeed the failure of most British news organisations to even have a journalist in Gaza. They're relying almost entirely on independent journalists in Gaza, several hundred of whom have been murdered by the Israeli forces, yet nevertheless carry on. They, to me, are real journalists and the real hero of the situation. They've stayed there, done all they could, and carried on doing that reporting, knowing full well that the Israeli Defense Force targets journalists in all of its activities. And so he set this out in a very personal way. And this is a young man who has been starved, basically, for most of the past 2 years. He's a very fit guy. He's a footballer. but he said he didn't get anywhere near enough food to sustain any level of physical activity, and he just felt permanently tired and exhausted by the starvation that's been forced upon him. And with the best will in the world, and I hope he does make a full recovery from the trauma of all this, that's going to affect him for a long time. And then I was looking at him thinking, well, he's a strong, fit young man, and he's having trouble coping. What about those that are less young, less strong, and less fit? How do they cope with all of this? This is the brutality of what's going on. We then went into part two. What are Britain's legal responsibilities on this? And so we invited a number of people to come and outline their duties and obligations that are laid down in both domestic and international law. Remember, Britain prides itself by saying it fully supports and observes all aspects of international law. And this is something I hear time and time again by ministers of all parties in the House of Commons. And to deal with this issue and other issues, we're delighted to be joined by Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine. And she chose her words carefully because she is a UN rapporteur, and obviously everything she says is carefully examined and monitored. And what she said, and I quote, "Ministers may be complicit in Israel's war crimes by the supply of weapons, by the supply of intelligence, by the overflying from the Royal Air Force bases in Cyprus, and by the supply of parts for the F-35 jet, which is causing so much devastation." And she then spoke at some length about the way in which other countries are also complicit in Israel's war crimes. And I think we are all very indebted to to Francesca Albanese for the work that she's doing and carries on doing, and I've got huge admiration for her. We then moved on to part three. What has Britain's role been in the genocide? Now, we framed it that way because solidarity is important, actions are very important, but it's also important that we do things to have the maximum effect within our own societies. So we are a group based in London, Peace and Justice Project. We obviously have an international outlook, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this, but we have to look at what we can do within our own society. So that's why I want to look at Britain's involvement and see where we can put pressure on. And so we looked at Britain's involvement into the Israeli military operations in Gaza, including the points I made on supply of weapons, surveillance, and the use of RAF bases. And it also became apparent during our tribunal that not only did Britain use the RAF bases in Cyprus to undertake overflying of Gaza, but also apparently from weapons delivery station, and apparently also Israel is able to use it and also use bases in Cyprus, and that is being looked at very, very carefully by the campaign in Cyprus. And indeed we met people who have been very active on the campaign in Cyprus itself, and I think it's important we do that. And so we looked at the use of the base and the supply of weapons, surveillance, and so on. And then we heard from Mark Smith, a British Foreign Office official, a Mandarin, if you like, Foreign Office staff, who described how many people in the Foreign Office were deeply upset at what the government's policies were, and deeply upset that what they were being asked to say about it all, when they believe, as I suspect all of us do in this event today in Istanbul, that war crimes have been committed and acts of genocide are taking place. And so he has worked in the Middle East arms export licensing assessment for the government, and he described how he was routinely asked to amend his reports on Gaza, and I quote, to make the situation look less bad, including downplaying the number of civilian deaths. And he described how he was told to delay submissions of reports until they could find something more positive to publish about Israel's involvement in Gaza. And so here was somebody being told how to write his reports and also to delay publication of them until they could find something positive to say about Israel's involvement in Gaza. And I just quote again from his evidence. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations on the most controversial aspects of our arms sales policy, which will never be seen by the public. And he described that because they were asked not to write things down, asked not to record meetings, asked not to record events discussing with each other, just to basically do everything on an informal basis. This was a practice first adopted by Tony Blair during the Iraq War. And he went on to say how the whistleblowing team who he'd reported this to were ignored, as well as other Foreign Office staff. Whistleblowing is a legal right in Britain. There is legislation to provide protection for whistleblowers. These are people that tell uncomfortable truths from within publicly funded and publicly run organizations. And he said how the concerns they raised were completely ignored. And he went on to suggest that it was impossible to see how the UK government was acting legally in its behaviour towards Gaza. We also met the family of Mr. Henderson, who worked in World Central Kitchen and was killed in Gaza. And he was killed by Israeli bombardment. And his lawyers said that they believed that the RAF, Royal Air Force flights that were overflying Gaza, were overflying at the time of his death, the time of his murder by the Israeli forces. And so he asked the RAF, through the Ministry of Defence in London, as a lawyer, if he could have access to their film of the event when Henderson was killed. And you know what? They said, no, you cannot have it. I'd previously asked separately in Parliament if all the film they'd taken of overflying Gaza could be made available to the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. They said no. And they claimed all the film was about releasing hostages, and they would only release it to the Israeli government. And so I rest my case that I think the overflying has all been about assisting Israel's military activities in Gaza by giving them a picture of what's going on there. And he was not even, the lawyer was not even allowed to look at the film footage himself. So we have a pretty bad scenario here of an awful lot of other things. We then heard from Matt Kennard, who's a very experienced journalist involved with a group called Palestine Deep Dive and others. He investigated how Britain had shared surveillance data with Israel to support military operations in Gaza. And again, I quote from him, having looked at the evidence, I think Britain's involvement in the genocide crosses the line into participation. The UK government, through its different military and intelligence agency, has been a participant. And we also heard, as Richard Falk is with us today, from him. And I want to say, Richard, thank you very much for taking part and the evidence you put forward and the power of the message you put forward and your consistent message of humanity for the Palestinian people. Last section was on, again, focused on the British participation. Has Britain lived up to its legal obligations? In this section, we analysed the evidence presented to us to conclude whether Britain had fulfilled its legal obligations or not, as laid out in both domestic and international law. And remember, point I made earlier, Britain is a signatory to all international legal conventions on genocide, on torture, and so on. Sign up, obviously, UN Universal Declaration, European Declaration, International Criminal Court statutes, and historically to the International Court of Justice, which of course predates all the other UN institutions because it was a product of the League of Nations. And we were wanting to know whether Britain has fulfilled its legal obligations or not. So we heard from Tayyab Ali, very respected lawyer, and he said his work from the International Centre for Justice for Palestinians, and he gave a forensic assessment of the whole thing at some length. And his conclusion, this was the last evidence, was that Britain was not only failed to meet its legal obligations, but was actively breaching them. And he's somebody that is extremely well informed and very, very knowledgeable on this, as is, of course, the International Centre for Justice for Palestinians. So what's the conclusion of this? We didn't receive enough evidence that I wanted to be able to listen to on environmental impact, water pollution, and the damage to the future possibility of growing crops in Gaza because of the pollution from asbestos poisoning and much else because of the destruction of so many buildings. And so forensic architects gave us a very thorough examination and study on the way in which buildings have been destroyed in Gaza City and other places, but we've asked for further environmental information, which we've now received from Gaza architects and others. And our conclusion is that the government's legacy will be its complicity on some of the greatest crimes against humanity of our time. We've already discovered, 67,000 bodies in Gaza. Estimates vary as to the number of bodies that are still under the rubble, but it's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands more. And the figures I've just heard are that somebody's been estimating the amount of rubble in Gaza. There are 55 million tons of rubble in Gaza. That's like 2 million tons or more, 10 million tons for each Gaza person of rubble created by the Israeli bombardment. Somebody's got to clear all that away. Somebody has got to process all of that to find bodies and body parts in it. And somewhere along the line, somebody's got to start rebuilding. And just like in Iraq, the government is doing everything it can to protect itself from scrutiny on Iraq. They'll not succeed because our tribunal report will be published very soon. We're just completing the final words of it now, and this will uncover, in my view, the full scale of British complicity in genocide, and will bring about justice for the people of Palestine ultimately. We can't bring back those that have been murdered in Gaza. We can't turn the clock back on all those children whose lives have been lost, who've suffered lifetime problems of disability and other things brought about by what's happened there. But we can alert the world to what happens when you sell arms to a regime that's committing genocide. You can alert the world to the way in which truth is twisted in order to protect those who know full well that they are actually complicit in breaches of international law. And so our tribunals are very, very important. And I'll just conclude with this. I was in South Africa last month and doing meetings with a lot of people, with Dr. Barghouti and myself, went to a lot of places, spoke at meetings, rallies, and took information and evidence from people. I'm very impressed that South Africa took the case to the International Court of Justice, but also people are saying, well, we need to economically isolate Israel as well, and that's why South Africa should, if it can, and I believe it can, cease the supply of coal to Israel. It's not a huge amount that's sent, but nevertheless it is symbolic. And so it is about pursuing the BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions, on all this. I also went to Namibia to meet the government of Namibia and have discussions with them, as well as with the ruling party, SWAPO, and with a very wonderful group of people who have been campaigning in support of Palestine in Namibia, and they were extremely impressive. And so I came back with the feeling that there's some very brave people in often very difficult circumstances doing an incredible job, and that's what this tribunal is about. That's what our Gaza Tribunal is about, and that's why all of us have got to work together cooperatively to get the word out there all across the world. The people of Palestine should not have to live under occupation, should not have to suffer genocide, and that those countries that supply weapons to Israel are complicit in the horror story that has been Gaza since October 23.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Corbyn, for being a part of the final session of the Gaza Tribunal. Thank you for your time and for the words important to be said, especially in a place like this and in times like these. We will proceed, and the next speaker is Giustino Marinello. He will be speaking about a subject of the ICC under attack, the struggle for justice and accountability during the genocide in Palestine.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks to the organizer for the invitation. Distinguished members of the jury, it's an honor for me to appear before you to speak about the struggle for international justice in a context in which impunity has long provided the fertile ground for the most serious crime. I speak not as a distant observer, but as someone who, together with Raji Sourani and Chantal Meloni, has the privilege of bringing the voices of Palestinian victims from Gaza to The Hague. Parents who have buried their children, relatives of journalists, doctors, humanitarian workers, and human rights defenders killed in direct or indiscriminate attacks. Survivors who have lost the entire family and still search through the rubble for the names of the missing. On behalf of entire communities who, despite everything, continue to believe that justice is still possible, we bring the voice of relatives of victims of starvation, and we had the possibility recently to document how Israel concretely put in place a policy of deliberate starvation by preventing the access of essential goods in the Gaza Strip. I'm referring to food, water filters, heavy hospital devices, drugs, including insulin for children, anesthetics, in a context in which 10 children on a daily basis are subject to amputation of one or more limbs without anesthetics. They are preventing the access of croissant, labeled as luxurious goods by the Israeli Authority, and as such, Palestinians do not have any right to get access to such luxurious goods. For Palestinian victims, the ICC has represented a fragile but vital thread of hope. The belief that in a world of double standards, one institution may still uphold equality before the law. The issuance of arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant marked a defining moment for international justice. It was a historical step for Palestinian victims for whom the ICC remains the only avenue for justice. It was a historic moment for Palestinian civil society organizations, particularly the Palestinian Center for Human Rights and Al-Mezan, which have documented crimes under immense pressure. Their offices have been destroyed. Together with Adamir and Halak, their organizations have been sanctioned by the Trump administration only for seeking justice. Their staff has been killed. Ihab with his wife and his two daughters, Rima and Najima, 3 and 6 years old, Noor with 70 family members, including her 2-year-old daughter, Dana with 39 family members. Arrest warrants were also historic for the court itself, which for the first time ever appeared to challenge the paradigm of the justice of powerful, where international law is rigorously applied to some and excluded for others. Yet, this historical step cannot hide the serious shortcomings that have marked the court's engagement with Palestine. It took 12 years to the ICC to open a formal investigation, a delay that has caused profound disillusionment among victims and reinforced the perception that justice is selective. The first prosecutor, Ocampo, admitted that he would never authorize a case that could disturb, using his words, the United States. When prosecutor Fatou Bensouda finally opened an investigation, its scope was extremely narrow, confined to specific incidents, failing to address the broader context of systematic oppression, collective punishment, and apartheid structures in the occupied Palestinian territory. Under the prosecutor Karim Khan, initially the situation in Palestine was not a priority. Only after October 2023, the prosecutor showed his attention for Palestine. His request for arrest warrants came in May 2024, when Gaza had already been devastated, over 36,000 people had already been killed, and 1.7 million of people had been displaced. Even then, the investigation scope was limited. Some of the most documented crimes were excluded: genocide, torture, forced displacement, just to mention a few. The investigation failed to address crimes committed before October 2023, also in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This selective framing implicitly legitimized the false narrative that atrocities began only after October 7, ignoring decades of structural violence and persecution. By excluding senior Israeli military officials, the prosecutor also reinforced the myth of the most moral army. Most concerningly, the arrest warrants did not produce any deterrent effect. Two factors, in my view, largely explain the failure in relation to the deterrence: the ICC's law hesitant approach and the hostility to the court by powerful states. Trump administration imposed sanctions on the prosecutor, her deputies, judges, and Palestinian NGOs. These measures have already weakened the ICC capacity to function. Software providers have suspended their services. US-based lawyers and groups have ceased cooperation with the court and also with legal representatives of victims. Even requests for arrest warrant against senior officials like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have been delayed because of the sanctions. In the very next few days, Trump could sanction the institution itself. That could be a final blow to the institution's existence. We expected a strong reaction by the ICC state parties. However, Gaza genocide proved once again that European states' support to international justice is driven only by political convenience. Many of the ICC members, including France, Germany, and Italy, that had applauded the court's action in Ukraine, condemned the court for investigating crimes in genocide. EU institutions, which now consider the ratification of the Rome Statute as essential requirements to become a new EU state party, have not put in place any effective mechanism to reduce the impact of the sanctions on the court and its staff. So it's now clear that EU states are willing to sacrifice the entire international justice system to shield an ally. However, despite the politicization of justice, despite the attacks and threats to everyone engaging with the court in relation to the situation in Palestine, we have decided to continue to engage with the court, to document international crimes and submit all the evidence and legal analysis to the office of the prosecutor. In Raji Sourani's own words, we have no right to give up. The very intensity of the assault on the ICC proves how dangerous accountability is to those who rely on impunity. To abandon the pursuit of justice would be to betray every Palestinian victim of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crime, and to betray the principle that all human beings are equal before the law. Distinguished members of the jury, we are not naive. We are fully aware that the end of the settler colonial regime will not arrive through the International Criminal Court. We are fully aware that the ICC is imperfect, too slow, too cautious, too vulnerable to political pressure. But even in its fragility, it remains one of the few tools to resist the normalization of impunity. The court, alongside the national investigation under universal jurisdiction, offers one of the few remaining instruments capable of challenging this cycle of impunity. For Palestinian victims, this investigation is more than a legal process. It's an affirmation of their humanity, of the simple truth that their lives and suffering matter. Distinguished members of the jury, we kindly invite you to cooperate with the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court by transferring all the relevant evidence you may have, and we kindly invite you to raise awareness on the crucial role of Palestinian civil society organizations working to establish the truth. Without the tireless documentation of Palestinian civil society organizations, no international investigation would never have been possible, as the ICC staff or investigators had never set foot in the occupied Palestinian territory. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to our speakers. We have just heard was the expert reflection to everything said so far. And now we'll proceed to our witnessings, to stories of those who have lived through genocide, whose families are gone or still fighting for survival. Next topic we will be talking about is colicide. And now it's time for Osama Al-Osta to come, to approach and to speak. He's a Gazan student, and he will be talking about the dreams they took and are taken every minute.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit stressed, but we will manage. Please point to me if I need to slow down. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Osama Al-Osta. I'm 23 years old from Gaza and originally from Akka. I graduated from Ibrahim al-Maqadma High School in Gaza back in 2020 from the scientific stream. After graduation, I enrolled at Al-Azhar University to study computer science. However, during the 11 days war, specifically on the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood event, first time to have my education interrupted. In the same war, one of the most well-known Gaza's building was destroyed. In that building, I was working and I loved my work, and it was a good start as a freshman. And then after the war was over that time, my family argued me to think about my safety and future. So in September 2021, I left from Gaza to Turkey to start my school. I began studying software engineering at a private school in Istanbul and stayed in Turkey for a year and a half. And then in February the 6th, 2023, the Kahramanmaraş earthquake hit and the education was online and switched online. On March 1st, I went back to Gaza. I missed home deeply and wanted to be reunited with my family and people since special holidays were coming. I dropped out in school in Turkey and then I re-enrolled in computer science at my university in Gaza and started the new semester. Just 10 days before the 7th of October. I stayed in Gaza for another 6 months, but eventually I had to leave again. But this time leaving my family behind without knowing that whether they will survive or not. I stand before you today to give my testimony because what happened to me and to the thousands of students like me must not be forgotten. Like every student, every young person, every human being, I had dreams. Dreams of graduating, continuing my studies, and expanding my knowledge. I wanted to leave a positive imprint on my society through projects, startups, and initiatives. However, the occupation was and still an obstacle to every dream I have ever had. I had a life before the genocide. We were living under siege and occupation, always controlled, but it was a life that I tried to accept, but it was never easy, and I didn't have any other option but trying to accept it. I loved going to school, seeing my friends sharing breakfast before class, and after school we would walk 15 minutes to the sea to feel free at last, even if it was only for a brief minute. Then came October the 7th. That morning, I woke up early, ready to go to school for a short exam and continue with other classes. 5 minutes later, I received a message from the university administration saying, "For your safety, the school will be closed until further notice." I thought maybe it would be a week, just 10 days as we had before, until the Israeli defense minister said, "We are fighting against the human animals," announcing a complete siege on Gaza. He was announcing a complete siege as if we didn't had one before, and we have been living under siege for more than 20 years now. On October 13, everything began to collapse. We were ordered to evacuate homes near Gaza Valley and flee to the south. I took what I could, my certificates, my ID, my passport, my laptop and a few clothes, and a few books, because I still believed somehow the education would continue. 6 days later, on October 19th, they destroyed my neighborhood, Zahra City. I was less than 3 kilometers away, hearing every explosion. They were not only destroying buildings, they were destroying my childhood, my memories, the very streets where my life began. All of it was erased. And why? To crave a corridor dividing Gaza into two, south and north. When the footages started coming from there, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that it was true. So I went back to make sure that, because I couldn't believe it, I went back. I was not able to recognize my city and my neighborhood that I have spent most of my life. My high school was turned into a military base for IOF. Soon after, my university was gone too, reduced to rubble. That was the moment I knew we would never go back to class again, never have the chance to live normally again. In only 1 month's time, everything I had built my dreams on was gone, and yet, we did not even have the privilege to mourn, no time to grieve the people we lost, the future that vanished, the dreams that turned into nightmares. I lost my hope of graduating, while peers abroad continued their study. I had to watch my campus burn. They did not only bomb our buildings, but they also erased our future. That loss of education, of hope, of dreams, is a burden I will carry forever. We will carry forever. Then everything turned into survival. You couldn't grieve, not when you were standing in endless lines for water, or at the bakery for essentials for survival, which was bombed later on, even though people who have normal lives don't even think about it. Days passed, and another evacuation order came. We had to leave again, because our area, south of the valley where it was supposedly to be the safe zone, was becoming a dangerous zone. It was Christmas Eve, 2023. While the world was celebrating with their families, we were packing what we had, heading into the unknown. We tried calling everyone we knew, but every place was already full. In the end, we went to Rafah, stayed in the skeleton of unfinished shop that didn't even have a bathroom. I remember walking more than an hour each day just to charge my phone and stay connected. But even that was not always possible. Communication blackouts tried to silence us, while bombs kept falling on homes, hospitals, churches, and even mosques. I was the only one with a phone that still had international roaming, so I shared Wi-Fi with everyone I could. The IOF tried to cut every signal, but I somehow managed to keep ours alive. Rafah was a turning point. It was very exhausting for me to find basic needs like water, food, and shelter. It was also a moment of realization. Why am I doing this? Why do I have to live this? Why it's difficult to access water or wait so long just to use the bathroom? Although we tried to make our stay in Rafah livable, it never turned out to be so. I remember going 14 days without showering, so I decided there was no point of me being dead here, and it was no longer safe. Because I had no dual citizenship, I paid a lot of money to leave. So this is a brief part of my story, but I'm here not only for myself. I'm here because this story is not just mine. This case is not special about me as a person. There is an entire generation of students who were killed, silenced, displaced by the IOF and denied their right to exist. More than 1,000 professors were killed. 80% of Gaza's schools and universities are either partly damaged or fully destroyed. The last standing buildings have become the only refugee for Gaza who no longer have homes to return to. There are a lot of stories about students who I know in person that they were killed cold blood. However, I want to honor one of these professors who was killed by IOF as they were targeting him directly, Dr. Rifat Al-Arair, a man who inspired a whole generation and still inspiring. He always emphasized how important it's to mention that the Israeli occupation killed us, not leaving it for the passive voice. He wrote, and I quote, "If I must die, you must live, to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of clothes and some strings. Make it with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale." My story is just one page in a book written by thousands of students. If I am here today, it's to make sure that their silence is not the final word, because they didn't choose to be silent, they were silenced. Our generation will carry this loss forever in our studies, in our lives, in our sleepless nights. This experience changed everything. It has the power to make the future feel meaningless. Whenever I try to do something new, try to continue my studies abroad, try to move on, I think of those who cannot. The survival guilt always chases me. I find no more dreams inside of me. I cannot even plan for tomorrow. Studying feels like running on a broken ground. And for me, it went too extreme that I started a hunger strike just to feel how is my family doing. And everyone and every student who's still in Gaza and don't have the chance to leave. Yet, I stand here because we are still here, I'm still here, my voice is not gone. When they destroy a university, it's not only concrete that falls, it's the future that comes crashing down. This was no accident, no natural disaster. It was a deliberate attempt to silence us, to erase our dreams. But we refuse to disappear. We are not numbers. Each of us has a name, a story, a family, and dreams. So I ask the jury, do not only listen, please act. Hold those responsible accountable. Protect education, because protecting education means protecting the future. Saves Palestinians' lives everywhere. And thank you.
Thank you, Osama, for your voice, and thank you for courage to speak. Next to talk and to speak and to analyze is Mr. Malek Al-Sverki. He's a scholasticist in Gaza. That's the topic that we will be discussing in the next minutes. A witness to the systematic destruction of education. He needs to be with us online, and we will be listening to him for the next 10 minutes or 15. Mr. Malek, do you hear me?
Hello?
You are with us? Okay.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Malek, scholasticide in Gaza, a witness to the systematic destruction of education. The time is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hi. So, my name is Malak Aliswerki. I'm a survivor of the genocide in Gaza, and I was recently evacuated from Gaza to Ireland, where I am now a student at the Trinity College Dublin. I spent 690 days in the Gaza Strip during the genocide, which is 1 year, 10 months, and 20 days. And today I stand here as a witness to scholasticide, having received most of my education in Gaza, and watch everything I once learned turned into rubble before my eyes. In the 15 minutes I have, I will address the systematic obliteration of education in Gaza. Before the genocide, Gaza had one of the highest rates of education in the Middle East. And from my own experience, I believe this is because my community has always valued education, not as a privilege, but as a way to survive. And all of my community believe that education and civic participation were the only path to break the prison we lived and unfortunately still live in. And for us, breaking this prison meant freedom and survival. Until October 2023, my father was a professor of accounting and my mother was a mathematics teacher in a secondary school. My sister used to study dentistry at Al-Azhar University, and my younger brothers, who can unfortunately no longer attend the schools, were always among the top students in their classes. Ahmed who's my younger brother, he was in the 8th grade when the war started, and Luay, he's the youngest, he was in the 5th grade. As for me, I graduated from high school in July 2023 as the second highest ranking student across Palestine with a GPA of 99.4. I received a governmental scholarship to study at Al-Azhar University in Al-Mughraqa city. I planned to study political science and pursue a career as a diplomat and a human rights advocate. I wanted to be someone who could represent her country with integrity and pride. However, and unfortunately again, and with the beginning of the genocide, my university was completely wiped out in November 2023, and the city where it once stood has become what Israeli soldiers now call the Netzarim checkpoint. And this was the first moment I understood that this genocide was not only against lives, but also against education. The destruction of my university marks the beginning of the forced erasure of learning in my community. And this is when I felt that Gaza began to lose not just buildings, but also values, culture, and future generations of educated people. The jury should be mindful that scholasticide is not an abstract word. And to help you understand what it means for me and for Gazans, I will name the educational institutions my family and I attended from kindergarten to university and what has become of them. Bisan Kindergarten, which was my kindergarten from 2010 to 2012, now it's partially destroyed. Bara'am Kindergarten, now it's completely destroyed, and this is a kindergarten my sister attended from 2007 to 2009. Al-Karama Primary and Secondary School, it was turned into a military point, then destroyed, bombed repeatedly over displaced families seeking shelters. I studied in this school from grades 1 through 8, and this for me means 8 years of childhood memories. They all now crushed into rubble. The place where this school used to stand on, now it became a buffer zone between Gaza and Israel. And on the 8th of May in 2025, my cousin was killed in this school while sheltering there after his home in At-Tufah neighborhood was bombed. There is also Sha'ban Al-Rais High School. It got also militarized and bombed multiple times, including after a charity distributed food to starving refugees inside. It got bombed only because there was a charity distributing food there. My sister completed her high school there. I studied in 9th grade there. My mother used to teach there before the genocide. And when she returned after a partial strike in July 2024, before it got completely bombed, the teacher's room where she used to have her office was gone. She remembered the biscuits she had left in her drawer on the 5th of October 2023. And a month later, amid famine, she said she would have given anything for that small piece of food, but the room itself no longer existed. There is also Al-Zahra Basic School.
Ms. Malak, can you hear me?
Yeah.
My apologies. We have just small requests for you just to slow a bit down, because our professors and academics are really doing their best to hear every single word of you. They find it very important. So just to slow a bit down. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, it's because I'm minding the time clock.
I know, it's okay. You can just take your time, slow down. We have enough time. Thank you very much.
Okay. There is also Al-Zahra Basic School in a Darj neighborhood. It got also completely destroyed in and I studied my 10th grade there. There is also a Ramla Secondary School. It got completely destroyed in July 2024. And this really hurts me to talk about this school, especially because I studied my 11th and the 12th grades there. And I saw it in trouble in August 2024. When I saw it in this way, I couldn't speak. It felt like my years of efforts and the friendships were buried beneath the rubble. There is also Shijaiya School. This is where my sister studied her 11th grade there. It got also completely destroyed. There is also Dar al-Arqam Basic and Secondary Schools. This is where my two brothers used to study before the war. Now it's completely destroyed. There is also Islamic University of Gaza. It got repeatedly turned into a military base. Now it's partially destroyed, then it got completely burned. This is where my mother received her engineering degree. There is also Isra University. It got completely destroyed as well. One of my closest friends used to study there before the genocide. There is also Al-Quds Open University. This is where my mother also completed her second degree mathematics. Now it's partially destroyed and completely burned. There is also Gaza University, Palestine University, and Al-Aqsa University. All of them are partially destroyed. Last but not least, there is also Al-Azhar University in Gaza City, not in Mughraqa City. So the one in Mughraqa City got completely bombed in the beginning of the war, but the one in Gaza City, here's the story of it. This is where my sister Farah was studying dentistry. It got bombed in November 2023 and later completely destroyed on the 5th of October 2025. Farah, my sister, and her classmates tried to complete most of their dentistry coursework online, but the practical courses were impossible for so many reasons. First of all, these practical courses should be in hospital and in university, but the university itself it refused to do that because, to be honest, hospitals get bombed a lot and universities as well, so they didn't want to risk the lives of their students. And now her university got bombed, so my sister couldn't graduate till now, and my sister cannot apply for scholarships outside of Gaza because she didn't again graduate. The jury should note the wider context. Since October 2023, all schools in Gaza have been closed because it's too dangerous for students to travel or attend the classes under constant bombardment. Meanwhile, most houses and apartment buildings have been struck or destroyed, and this caused a displacing of hundreds of families into tents or single rooms. In this mass displacement, schools became shelters for last resorts, and even these shelters were attacked. The places deemed too dangerous for children to learn became the only places left for their families to live in. And what happened to my family on the 21st of December 2023 in front of Al-Azhar University in Gaza City shows what scholasticide looks like on the ground. On 19th of December 2023, after an evacuation order, my family, my father, my mother, my sister, she was 20 years old, my brother who was 13, my youngest brother who was 9, and I was 18 years old, we left our home in a Tufah neighborhood for the safer western side of the city. We sheltered at my aunt's house, but my uncles took refuge inside Al-Azhar University, which is an educational institution, and it got turned into a place of displacement. 2 days later, my father asked us to go and visit our uncles, and because it was winter, they had no blankets. During the displacement, it's just so confusing that you just want to get out, you want to save your life, you can't take everything with you. So they didn't have blankets, they didn't have pillows, and the windows of the classes they were staying in, they were shattered by previous attacks on the university itself. At around 3 p.m., as we approached the university gates, a tank appeared at the end of the street, accompanied by a small drone. People around us were walking peacefully. Everyone was walking peacefully. And without a warning, the tank and the drone opened fire on us, randomly at everyone. A mother stood ahead of us holding a baby, and my father shouted for us to lie down. My father got shot on his thigh, and my mother was shot in her waist. We shouted that we were civilians, and we are unarmed. And we were standing in front of a university, which is a place that should be protected under the international law. The shooting paused, perhaps because we were all lying down, and the soldier inside the tank, he thought that we were dead. So we ran toward the gates when the shooting paused, and when I turned my back, I saw my father was still on the ground. This is when I found that he got shot in his thigh. The tank began to move toward him slowly, as if to crush him, and I ran back and dragged him away. During dragging him, I hear that the tank is preparing for a bomb, so for a shell, so it will bomb us. But luckily, I managed to pull my father inside the university gates. Moments later, after actually exactly at the same minute I managed to get my father inside the university, the tank bombed the gate and the entrance hall of the university. And this was the moment I understood that scholasticide is not theoretical. It's the deliberate conversion of a university, which is a space of thought, a space of humanity, into a battlefield. And between who? Between civilians and soldiers. Al-Azhar University, where my father earned his degree and where my sister used to study dentistry, is now gone. It was bombed on the 5th of October 2025. And I still ask myself, even if peace comes, how could my sister ever return to study in a place where we nearly lost our lives? And then I remember, well, she will never think in this way because the building itself, the buildings of Al-Azhar University, the university itself no longer stand. My journey as a student began in desperation, with no safe path to continue my education. From September 2024, I applied to universities abroad because there was nowhere left to study in Gaza. Under impossible conditions, no electricity, no internet. It's not even stable. It doesn't even exist. I walked 2 to 3 kilometers every day to find a signal, often standing in the street while drones circled overhead. There were no internet cafes and nowhere safe to charge a laptop. More than once, I chose to spend money meant for food on data and or phone charging to submit my applications. I completed my entire applications on my phone. I couldn't sit for exams like for international students like IELTS or TOEFL in Gaza because all test centers were closed. So I completed an online test, it's called Duolingo, and this happened while again drones flew above my neighborhood. Despite this, I received fully funded offers from Harvard, Yale, UPenn, Notre Dame, Wellesley in the US, Cambridge from the UK, Georgetown in Qatar, and Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. And I'm here today. I'm here because of volunteers and mentors who helped me through months of danger, and because of the Irish government with others facilitated the evacuation of students from Gaza to the countries that will host them, because they realized the worth of education and that students who are coming from conflict zones actually deserve a chance to get education. And I'm profoundly grateful for this. But for me, gratitude doesn't rebuild what was destroyed. It doesn't bring back our teachers. It doesn't bring back our classmates. It doesn't bring back our classrooms or the safety that once defined learning in Gaza. The jury should consider what this war has done to Gazan children. Ahmed, my brother, who's 15 years old now, and Luay, who's 11 years old, they have been disconnected from formal education for more than 2 years. Instead of learning spelling and arithmetic, they learned how to find food and water. Where once they practiced sums and read the stories, they now count the days without a meal. And they, and alongside thousands of other children, they were all forced to grow into survivors, not into they were all forced to grow into survivors, not into learners. Classrooms for children in Gaza, it means danger. It means surprising bombs. Schools that once displayed banners reading "My school is my second home" are now remembered as sites of mass massacres and despair. When a school becomes the last refugee for a family whose home was destroyed, and that refugee is bombed, what does this school mean for a child anymore? The place that maybe he or she lost their family in? Dear jury, we must face the truth. Education in Gaza has been deliberately and systematically attacked. Either we create new safe spaces for learning that do not carry the trauma attached to the war school, or we must name what has happened for what it is. Scholars decide, naming it as a first step toward ensuring it's not going to be repeated again. Finally, to my family, to Baba, to Mama, to Farah, to Ahmed and Lu'ay, I carry you with me into every classroom I enter. And I promise we will go back to our schools again, we will learn again, and we will rebuild the minds that were destroyed. And I really ask the jury to see what we lost and give that loss a name, so that justice may follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Malik, for your time and for the promise given at the end of your speech. The genocide of knowledge, Israeli systematic destruction of Gaza's intellectual life, and the silencing of Palestine's future. That is the topic we'll be talking and listening about in the next minutes. I'm calling for Mr. Wissam Amer to speak and to take his place at the stand.
Distinguished members of the jury, dear audience, it's always hard to speak after students and hearing all these witnesses from our students who were evacuated from Gaza. My name is Wissam Amer, former Dean of Faculty of Communication and Languages at Gaza University and currently a visiting professor at the University of Cambridge. I speak today not only as an academic, but also as a Palestinian, like thousands of Palestinians who lived through the systematic destruction of knowledge, the systematic destruction of Gaza's educational life. What I describe today is not just an abstract or theory. It is an experience. It is not only my experience, my personal experience. It's an experience for hundreds, if not for all academics and students in Gaza. What we have seen in Gaza is not only genocide, because the word genocide, the word massacres, the word war or conflict would not describe the reality on the ground. The reality is much beyond than that. What we have seen in Gaza is the deliberate erasure of knowledge, the methodological annihilation of universities, schools, and the killing of scholars, teachers, and students who embodied Gaza's intellectual heart. Since my evacuation from Gaza before the total closure of Rafah crossing, I have always carried a heavy mix of feelings. Though physically safe in Cambridge, still my mind remains tied to Gaza, as every Gaza person living outside, and every Palestinian and every supporter to the justice in Palestine. I worry constantly for my family, my neighbors, my colleagues, my students, who continue to endure what feels unbearable circumstances. My family and I were displaced several times. We lived in tents or in temporary tents. And honestly speaking, the word tent, when I say tent, it's much exaggeration, because the meaning of these words or these terms would not describe the reality. The tent in Gaza is just a stick and a piece of clothes or plastic. And you can imagine, in such circumstances, you want to protect yourself, your family, your kids, your students, who keep asking for lessons and to ask and concern about their studies. Together, we struggled to find clean, drinkable water, as we heard from our students. It was a big struggle. The big priority was to survive as much as possible, to find electricity, to charge our phones, devices, so we can connect with our students, with our colleagues, and even to search for a quiet corner that could serve as makeshift classroom. These moments reveal not only our suffering, but also the solid determination of people in Gaza, of academics, of students, to preserve life and learning amid genocide, learning amid devastation and destruction. What is unfolding in Gaza today is not merely a genocidal war. It is the continuation of a Zionist settler colonial project that seeks to uproot Palestinian existence. What my generation is witnessing is, in truth, a second Nakba. History is repeating itself. The same trauma that my grandparents endured in 1948, and again my parents in 1967, is now being lived by us, the current generation in Gaza. Since October 7th, 2023, we have faced renewed and multiple displacements, systematic violence, and the same relentless campaign of erasure. For 17 years, we survived under blockade and open-air prison, where scarcity was constant, but dignity remained intact. Despite everything, we continued to teach, to learn, and to dream, and will continue to dream for a better future for our people, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Here, I would like to share some photos that I'm not sure if it works, sorry.
Just point it into the screen.
Nope, does not work, sorry. As you can see here, even though we faced the Israeli 17-year blockade and siege of Gaza, we tried our best to survive the blockade. Here, these photos capture the brighter side of Gaza. Moments of perseverance, community, and hope. They remind me of the vibrant life we built before the war, especially during my years as Dean of Faculty. I was Dean at Gaza University. A time defined by creativity, intellect, and the belief that education could light a path through even the darkest days of the siege and blockade. Israel's assault on Gaza has spared no sector of civilian life. Infrastructure, hospitals, schools, shelters, and mosques lie in ruins. Entire families, as we have heard from our students, have been wiped out, and whole neighborhoods, including educational and medical institutions, reduced to rubble. This devastation forms the backdrop to Gaza's ongoing humanitarian and intellectual catastrophe. I'm not sure if there is any. And you can see here how we tried to survive the first days or the first months of the war when I was in Gaza. As you can see in number one, I tried my best to find, together with a colleague and also neighbors, a solar panel where we could charge our devices, our mobiles. And the second photo is the neighborhood where I lived and grew up. And third photo is my flat. You can see in such destroyed and damaged flat. And then fourth image is my classroom at Gaza University. And in the last photo is an UNRWA school where my daughters learned for their years or for the schools. Distinguished members of the jury, in the Gaza Strip, we have 12 higher education institutions accredited by the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. As you can see here, the photos of our beautiful campuses. In these campuses, where I used to work in some of them, we used to teach, also to educate, because these are not just buildings. These represent generations and generations. So the deliberate and systematic destruction is called and termed by scholars as scholasticide, a term that I learned only recently, though I have lived it for years. In Gaza, it's daily life. The scholasticide refers to the systematic, intentional destruction for a people's education or educational infrastructure, intellectual communities, and cultural knowledge and knowledge systems. Of course, it includes or encompasses targeted attacks, deliberate erasure, structural incapacitation, epistemic violence, but also what I can add to the definition on concept of scholasticide is the Israeli incitement against the Palestinian syllabus and Palestinian curriculum. Libraries, archives, and ministries were flattened. As I said, these were not just buildings. They were generations of learning, research, and dreams collapsing in an instant. The jury should take into account what Israel has done is not only to destroy schools, universities, or colleges in Gaza, it has deliberately shattered the idea of a future built through education. In its genocidal war, Israel has left anything in Gaza, including all educational and higher educational institutions in Gaza. As you can see here, how Israel devastated and destroyed the campuses of our universities, and also killed colleagues that I used to work closely in Gaza. Here I refer to the former president of the Islamic University, Professor Sufyan Taye. He was killed alongside his family in Jabalia camp. Also, two of my colleagues from the same department, Dr. Hibal Abadla and Dr. Imtinan. And also, I would never forget my colleague and friend, Dr. Wissam Al-Isa. He was a professor at Al-Aqsa University. We share the same name, and we share the same fellowship. He was a Cara Fellowship, a Scholars at Risk program at Manchester University. But he returned to Gaza before October 7th. He was killed in Gaza. Actually, he was killed in Rafah. And I always think of him personally because not only we share the same name or we share the same fellowship, but also I put myself in his position. If I would have stayed in Gaza, what kind of faith I would have faced in Gaza. I know time is running, but I think to respond to scholasticide, we need to have de-scholasticide approach, because to respond to the systematic construction or destruction, to respond to the systematic destruction, we need to have a systematic construction. And for this systematic construction, I think we should work together in a very collective way where we can support the sumud, the resilience and steadfastness of people and academics and students in Gaza. Finally, the jury should recognize that the justice for Gaza must include the right to learn, to teach, and to remember. To kill a scholar is to kill the memory of a people. To bomb a university is to bomb the bridge to the future. Knowledge survives in fragments of memory, in the will to resist erasure. Also here, I would like to finish this talk with a poem that I always finish my talks with, by Dr. Rifat Al-Arir, because he was a dear friend and colleague at the Department of English at the Islamic University of Gaza. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things. We keep saying, keep explaining, and we keep telling the story of every single university, every single student in Gaza. And of course, if I must die, let it be bring hope. We need this hope to rebuild Gaza and make it a tale of success, to save the generations of students, academics in Gaza in Palestine in general. Thank you so much.
And as a conclusion to this topic, and before we open session of questions and answers, we will look at the testimonies about scholasticide.
خمس سنوات أنا في عندي جيل 5 سنين.
حتى لو بلشوا اصلا القصف واستهداف المدارس. حتى لو يعني انتهت الحرب يكون الرجعه للمدارس تكون صعبه جدا. كان يعني اول شيء استهداف المدارس واستهداف الطبقه التعليميه.
يعني عائلة زوجة أخيك رحمهم الله الاستهداف جاء ضمن الكفاءات العلمية التي يتم استهدافها في هذه الحرب. لا ذنب لهم سوى أنهم كفاءة
علما أنه والدها هو خريج الجامعات الأمريكية ويعد من أصحاب البحوث العلمية المحكمة في أمريكا، وهو كان عميد كلية التمريض في الجامعة الإسلامية، ولا ذنب لهم إلا كما ذكرتي عملية استهداف للعقول وللكفاءات الفلسطينية.
دكتورة، كيف حال الآن الجامعة الإسلامية في غزة وكيف أحوال زملائكم هناك؟
طبعا الجامعة الإسلامية من أولى الجامعات التي استهدفت من قبل الاحتلال، فدمرت يعني كل مبانيها، لم يبقى ولا مبنى إلا وأصابه الصواريخ. هناك في الجامعة مكتبة مركزية قديمة جدا عريقة جدا فيها مئات الآلاف من الكتب، كلها دمرت ولم يبقى فيها شيء. الآن الكادر الأكاديمي أيضا استهدف في الجامعة، منهم رئيس الجامعة استشهد، وكثير من الطاقم التدريس والإداريين أيضا استشهدوا.
حتى جامعتي تم هدمها. أنا في كتاب إلي في صار موقف معايا لسه أول امبارح، في كتاب كنت حاصل عليه من دكتور عزيز في الجامعة ومش قادر أطلعه من غزة. بعثت تقريبا ل10 أشخاص وندمت على إني سألتهم. كنت بدي أطلب منهم شغلة واحدة، إذا في نسخة من الكتاب صوروا لي أكم من صفحة أو ابعثوا لي الملف PDF إذا كان متوفر منه PDF ثاني. تمام؟ ال10 أشخاص للأسف منهم صبايا ومنهم شباب درسوا معايا في الجامعة، ردوا علي رد صاعق، الكتاب والشهادات والأوراق كلها حرقت. هي تفصيلة، هي بسيطة جدا بالنسبة لأي إنسان. لو إنسان في الغرب عاش هاي التفصيلة يمكن لارتفعت محاكم الدنيا كلها عشان يراجعوا المجرم اللي سبب هذا الشيء.
أكثر من ذلك، أنا بقول لك الآن في عندنا جيل 5 سنين لا يدرس. اليوم أنا بطلت بديش على ابني لا يكون مهندس ولا دكتور ولا طبيب. إحنا كنا زمان وإحنا صغار أهالينا يتقاتلوا، بدي إياك تكون مهندس، بدي إياك يكون طبيب، يكون دكتور، عالم فضاء، أبصر شو. اليوم إحنا بدنا بس شغلة واحدة، بدنا ابننا يكتب ويقرأ بس، يعرف يكتب اسمه ويعرف يقرأ وبس. تخيلوا مثلا 5 سنين، إحنا 5 سنين، 2 حرب وما قبل كانت كورونا،
جائحة كورونا صحيح.
5 سنين، 5 سنوات أنا في عندي جيل حرفيا لا يستطيع أن يقرأ ولا يكتب.
كان في طالبة فاطمة حميد كنت أنا متواصلة معها قبل بيومين، قالت لي يا مس أنا في ضرب حوالينا كتير ورجعي ابعتي لي السلايدات، وبعثت لها وتحدثت معها قليلا يعني واطمأنيت عليها. تخيلي تاني يوم مباشرة، هيك تاني يوم مباشرة يعني على نفس الواتس بيجي بحكي أنا أخو فاطمة، أنا مش عارف أتواصل مع الجامعة، فاطمة استشهدت.
أريد أن أنوه فقط لأنه مدارس أونروا ربما البعض لا يعني يدرك هذه النقطة. المدارس هي التي كنا نستخدمها في السابق كمدارس للتعليم، هي حولت إلى مراكز إيواء منذ بدء الحرب، بالتالي تضم آلاف مئات الآلاف من النازحين.
يعني فعليا الأطفال وأهم شيء مرحلة التعليم طبعا مش موجود، لهم سنتين متوقفين عن التعليم. وانت عارفة احنا أصلا سلاحنا في غزة التعليم. صحيح. يعني أهم شيء عنا إنه يدرسوا ويتعلموا.
And now it's time for questions and answers. So I will ask the members of the jury if they have any questions, please to address.
Thank you very much for all the presentations. They're heartbreaking, to tell the truth. When the youth loses its hope, it brings the whole nation down. I want to ask the officials, the dean, about the students' records. Do we know if these students' records have been preserved, or if they are online, or if they are digitally available, or all these records for the past, since Gaza's universities have been in existence, have they been lost forever, or is there a way to retrieve them? Also, I know there were a lot of archival material that are very difficult to reproduce. I know Istanbul University, for example, they had lots of archaeological findings, possibly up to 3,000 pieces. So I don't know if we have a good record on what is lost, what is preserved, what is not there. Are there reports? I have seen a lot of reports, medical reports and other reports, but I haven't seen anything on universities and education. It would be very helpful if there are some reports that will have all these answers to these questions, particularly on the issue of students' records.
Thank you for the question. Usually in Gaza, we reserve or save the administrative records in local servers inside the universities. Some of the universities have or had digital servers together in collaboration with other universities outside Gaza. For example, Gaza University had cooperation with a university in Jordan. So they could save not every record for every student, but the majority, if we talk about the majority of students' administrative records, I would say, unfortunately, most of them have gone. The universities, the infrastructure in Gaza has all been gone, also for the universities. We tried to restore anything that we could at the beginning of the war, and then we asked the students to not to re-register, but to upload their manuscripts, any documents they have from the university. Then we tried to kind of restructure all the administrative records for the students. It's a big issue because the techno infrastructure in Gaza has always been affected, not because of the war only, but also for the past 17 years of the siege. All the technologies were very limited in Gaza. And now with the universities in Gaza have resumed the online learning in May 2024, but honestly speaking, we do exaggerate when we say online learning, because the infrastructure for online learning is not there. We have the model platform, but if you talk about electricity, there is no electricity at all in Gaza, and people rely actually on the solar panels that are available in some places, so the students and academics can charge their mobiles or their devices if they have any. Also, the safety and security are lost in Gaza. As a dean, I have never been able to ask any student or any academic to go to any educational cafe or hub in Gaza, because simply who would guarantee that this cafe or this hub would not be targeted by Israel. I know some colleagues, some students took the risk and walked long time to go to these to the so-called educational hubs or cafes in Gaza. But yeah, they took it was a really personal initiative, I would say, but they took the risk to face all the dangers that possibly could happen. Also, if we talk about the internet needed for infrastructure, for online learning and infrastructure, we use eSIM cards with very limited data. Maybe like in the last few months, there was some availability of Wi-Fi connection. But if we talk about the beginning of the war, or the first 15 months, most of the people in Gaza relied on eSIM cards with very limited data. So basically, when I used to ask my colleagues in Gaza, especially during the times of the exams, to upload their exams, they said yes, they would, but they don't have the capacity. They don't have the internet connection. So I asked them actually to send me the drafts of the exams, and I tried to to rewrite the designed exam and then upload them online. Administrative records are part of the major issues that we face in Gaza, because now it is also connected to online learning. Because if you think about rebuilding the higher education, of course, administrative records are important, but if we talk about the other elements to rebuild higher education institutions, of course, we need years and years. I'll say it is, rebuilding is very challenging, yet it is feasible. There is, way to reconstruct, if, as I said, if there is collective work that brings different efforts together, so we can help and support the students in Gaza. Possibly in the next few years, we would only rely on online learning. Yeah. All right, thank you.
May I have a follow-up very quickly?
Yeah, of course, yeah, go on.
How do you think this is going to impact the students themselves? Do they have that spirit that they would like to go on? Do they have, are they spirited? If you in your interaction with them, I saw Malak, for example.
Second, please, sorry.
I'm trying to see how the students react. 88,000 people have been locked out of learning. And now what they are giving few opportunities, perhaps e-learning, few people will have the same opportunity as Malak. So what would come out of the others? Would they have the spirit of going through tough years of trying to get education? One of the parents was saying that he doesn't see any point of going to engineering or medical or whatever. They just wants for them to be able to read and write. That kind of spirit, how would it gonna affect how will it impact the overall educational system if one was to really rebuild?
Well, of course, there is an impact on the students. As you know, it's not only their universities or their classrooms have been destroyed. Everything in Gaza, the priorities in Gaza have been, I would say changed, but the priorities have been modified. Rather than to think of education, the priority was to search for safety, security, water, food, and so on. Despite such situation, the students are very, very determined to continue their education. As dean and also as lecturer, I taught several models. If I talk about my personal experience, I got many, many messages, from students asking about, their certificates, about the materials that we communicate through WhatsApp groups. For each module, we have a WhatsApp group, to communicate the recorded voice lectures. This is like the strategy that we follow in Gaza, actually. We record our lectures by voice, and then we communicate these recorded lectures to our students via WhatsApp groups. And you can see like the students interact with us, even they face the bombardment. During the time of bombing, students came from one place to another. They also keep asking, hello, Dr. Wissam, what should we do this, what should we do that? You know, when is the exam, when is that? Can we delay the exam for another time because one student, or they were like displaced from one place to the another. I wouldn't say the students lost hope. Still, they determined, they have the resilience, but they need support to continue their education.
Thank you very much. The question is for our speaker just now. I'm just wondering whether one could take a leaf from the South African experience. A lot of the movements which sustained the anti-apartheid struggle, this was somewhere in the middle of the long struggle. Those movements actually operated from outside South Africa and outside the region in some respects, meaning by which can we look towards a situation where we will have Palestinian movements run and managed by non-Palestinians, non-Arabs in other parts of the world, who provide the information, who do the dissemination, which you are not able to do because of your situation. You have very basic problems like the problem of internet and the problem of maintaining communications on a constant and continuous manner. But people outside can do these things, even though they may not be in touch with you regularly, but they are part of a larger struggle. I may be wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen that sort of internationalization of the Palestinian struggle in relation to education so far, where academics who have their own personal links, they may not be part of an established infrastructure, but through their own links, they're able to sustain the struggle. Do you see something like that evolving in the case of Palestine?
Well, to respond to the scholastic side, internally there have been many local initiatives. One of them is called the TTSI and by Al-Najah University, and also another campaign, Right to Education by Birzeit University at the beginning of the war, where they hosted the Palestinian students from Gaza online to join the universities in the West Bank. This is first. If we talk about the external support and lead movement, I'm being involved in some initiatives, and I'm happy to say that the Palestinian-led network called Academic Action Network for Palestine is known as Act4PAL, which has been established in London by Palestinian academics, scholars, by which we try to educate and raise awareness and also to support our students and colleagues in Gaza. By this network, we talk to many partners, not only in the UK, but actually worldwide. We have several programs where to support. One of these programs is students at home scholarships, where we target the MA students who joined the MA programs at the universities in Gaza before October 7th, but they could not finish their studies because of the war, where we support them with tuition fees and also with mentorship, to support them also, academically. Another project is about mental health and trauma treatment that we also pay attention to. I wouldn't exaggerate if we say that everyone in Gaza is traumatized, even include myself and my daughters and my close family. Everyone in Gaza is traumatized because of all of what we have seen in Gaza is really beyond the imagination. So there is like some projects in collaboration with the universities in the UK. Also, there is the emergency committee led by Palestinian academics. Actually, it's a coalition of 3 universities in Gaza where they promote the support for students in Gaza. I mean, they mobilize and they promote the work worldwide as well. They have a SNAD program where people can fund the students. I mean, they can sponsor students, so mainly for tuition fees and releasing the certificates. Universities in Gaza do not ask students to pay tuition fees, but also at the same time, they do not release the certificates until students pay when they work. So it's like kind of, helping each other. Students are not obliged to pay the tuition fees now, or they can pay in installments until they finish their studies. I have to say, I have to clarify this point because all the universities in Gaza since 2017 rely completely, 100% on students' tuition fees. There is no other external funding for the universities. This means that if the universities, if the students pay the tuition fees for the universities, then the universities can cover some of the running costs. For example, like the salaries. I've never, ever got a full salary in Gaza in my work. Never, I got full salary. It's always on the reserve, like 50-40% a month, and then the rest of the salary is placed on the reserve, and we don't know when we will get. And it's not only me, it's like every university in Gaza follows this, this strategy, because this is the only available option for Gaza. So it's like helping students covering their tuition fees would indirectly sustain the higher education system in Gaza. This is why we call on the movements around the world. I know there are many initiatives, either for example individual or group initiatives. But unfortunately, from my observation, from my analysis, most of these initiatives work in isolation. They don't work together. So I always call on a collective, collaborative approach and framework where all these grassroots movements, initiatives, individually or collectively come together to prevent duplications of efforts, save money, and of course, save efforts, and of course, for building on rebuilding the higher education in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For members of the jury and all of those who do investigate, listen, read, search, and document, on our YouTube channel, Witness I, there are many testimonies and many interviews called Expert Talks, where experts have been analyzing the amount of devastation when it comes to archaeological and historical inheritance that unfortunately is being destroyed every day. So also you can find all the information on that channel along with the Gaza Tribunal YouTube channel, where you can find everything that you might have missed today or yesterday. For today, that's it. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And we start in the morning, sharp at 9, talking about complicity, international system, resistance, and solidarity. Thank you very much again.